This episode is sponsored by Revelation Records. Revelation is the label behind Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits, Texas to the Reason, and many more since 1987. Right now, Revelation is ramping up with two awesome new releases. The first is All in a Dream, a brand new record by the band Praise, out May 6th, as well as a new EP from Be Well, titled Hello Sun, out May 20th. You can pre-order both records by going to revelationrecords.com. Our listeners can also get 20% off Revelation-only merchandise by using the code ONESTEP. That's ONESTEP at checkout. Thank you for supporting our sponsors, and thank you so much, Revelation. I grew up and had so many formative experiences with Revelation bands, and I really appreciate you supporting the podcast. Everyone, welcome back. And Johnny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. So for the uninitiated, people who wouldn't know, and I will say there's people who definitely know and are super psyched that you're here. But for anyone who doesn't know, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Okay. Who am I? That's a big question. Who am I? I'm a human being, first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a father. I'm a husband. I used to feel uncomfortable saying I'm an artist because I would always say, who are you to say if you're an artist or not? But I would probably at this age claim that I'm a creative.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm a businessman. I don't try to think of myself as one. Mm-hmm. I think I'm more of a creative than I am a businessman. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I love being outside. I'm kind of a deep person, I think. That's probably that's something I probably am. Uh-huh. Deep thinker.
Mm-hmm. So let's go to the thing that you talked about, but you maybe were a little uncomfortable about, being an artist.
In what sense?
So what does it mean to be an artist, and why were you ever reticent to like kind of be like, should I call myself an artist?
Because I feel like being an artist, it's almost like it's up to people to decide if you're an artist or not.
Like your audience?
Yeah. Because I think that art is, it's subjective. Mm-hmm. And lots of people claim to be artists, but if really you're an expressionist, mm-hmm. and you do things on paper or painting or music, whatever that might be, because you feel the need to do that. But really, I'm not sure if you do that, if you're actually an artist, because it's the people around you that would decide whether that's art or not, because art is so subjective. But I felt very uncomfortable calling myself an artist, even though I literally have been doing art since I was a baby. Mm-hmm. That's all I've done. And if I talk to my friends or family, they will say I was drawing and creating and sculpting and building things, and just ever since I was just literally a baby. Mm-hmm. But up until probably, I'd say 10 years ago, I kept a lot of my art kind of quiet. Even though I've done thousands of skateboard graphics, thousands literally over my lifespan. But I never really, up until recently, kind of claimed a lot of that stuff. So yeah, I've always been uncomfortable with my art because I just sort of let other people decide whether I'm an artist or not.
It's interesting though, because it was like right up front of what you were talking about. You're like, I'm a human, I'm a father, I'm a partner. And you went to being an artist, and it's the only one that you attached a caveat. Well, except when you said, like, I guess I'm a business person. What made you, like, was it a conscious decision to be like, actually, you know what? That's crazy. I'm going to start calling myself an artist, or was it just a natural thing?
It had a lot to do with, it's funny, this is an interesting subject because it's pretty relevant. I draw this character. It's this thing I draw. I've drawn it for as far back as I can remember. And this little silly character that I draw, he has been in my life forever. Like it evolved as a doodle. And so I was doing art painting, doing graffiti when I was younger, and graphic design and art upon art upon art. And I had this little character that I drew, and he never made it onto anything. Highly unlikely that it would appear on any of my product, which I had product like everywhere. I mean, all over the planet. And whether it was product I had designed from like fashion or skateboard graphics, I mean, you name it, I was designing it and doing it. And, you know, yeah, and I didn't consider myself an artist, which as I talk about it sounds a little odd. But the silly little character that I drew always gave me so much joy. And I kept it very private, this guy that I draw all the time. And then eventually, or actually throughout a lot of time, people would always say, you know, that why isn't that on stuff? Like, you know, if I signed something, I might doodle him on the autograph or the thing I'm sketching or whatever. He's always kind of like around that. But the reason I bring it up is that maybe 10 years ago, it started kind of getting out there more. And I really enjoyed doing it on other canvases and started creating it. And then I was like, I love this thing so much, this silly character, that I wish I could almost like, I wish this was my job. Because it was a strange thing. And you know, if I tell this story, people think I'm crazy. I was like, I wish I could just draw this guy all day. This is so easy and it's so fun and it means so much and so simple. And it tells me so many things and other people so many things, this little stick figure guy. And from that, I was like, what if I was an artist and drew this character? You know, and I talked to my wife and she'd just be like, what are you talking about? You are an artist. Like, you've created thousands upon thousands of pieces of art. How come all of a sudden you've seen this little stick figure you've been drawing on a sketch pad for the last 40 years? Now all of a sudden this thing is what you think might cross you into being an artist? And I'm like, well, yeah, because I want to be like Charles Schwartz or Jim Henson, or, you know, I think of these other things. And somehow I decided, I was like, I guess I'm an artist because of this character. If that makes any damn sense, I don't know.
Dude, first of all, I'm dying to see this character now.
I could draw it.
Okay.
I'll draw it later.
Okay, before you go, I got to see it.
Yeah.
No, it's cool. Like, do you mind if I share something about me?
No, go right ahead.
I'm a terrible guitar player.
Okay.
I grew up playing in bands, as I was sharing with you earlier, but I'm horrible. Like, people who I've been playing, probably been playing guitar or bass for like, I don't know, 20 years. I cannot play many things. But I recently started calling myself, I'm even uncomfortable saying it now. Like, I started calling myself more of like a songwriter. I am not a musician at all. I think there are people who could not think. There are people who have been playing for like a year who could play circles around me. But what I'm really good at is putting together a song. I just understand the elements of how to do it. And when I would think of songwriters, you know, you think of like, first you think of like crazy, like John Lennon or something like that.
Sure.
But then more in our world, I think of someone like Walter Schreifels from Quicksand, Gorilla Biscuits. Like, that's a songwriter, you know. And then if you think of maybe more, think of, you know, a band like Turnstile, like they're songwriters, like really people who create things. In my own teeny little world in like straight edge hardcore, I've started to consider myself more of a songwriter because I'm not a good musician. I'm not necessarily good at doing a band, but what I am good at is putting together a song.
Yeah.
And I can do it for myself, or I could do it for other people, or I can weigh in on a song, but that I've got. And I was so reticent to do that because there's so many like good musicians around me who are like phenomenal. I don't even know what the knobs on my amp like properly do, like really, like legitimately. Like, I don't know how to get a good tone, but I can write a song. Yeah. So I relate to that. And I'm almost embarrassed saying it here, but it's like, yeah, like I'm actually more of a songwriter than I am a musician.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I would almost relate to that because I would say I'm more of a curator. And I guess to a certain degree, an art director / curator than I am an artist. And people might, depending, you know, the artist subjective. So some people might say I'm an artist, but there's no question, similar to you with your confidence of saying you're a songwriter, I would say I'm very confident saying I'm a curator because I really do know how to like get the right people together to do the right things, to tell the right story, and maybe even like help kind of shape the art or my art to like make sense with a particular initiative. So borderline director of like a film. So you have a vision in your head and you sort of know like how to pull it all together. And that's something it's funny, I feel comfortable saying that. So I can like, and by no means do I want to brag about this, but what I feel like I'm able to do, which is pretty much the story of my life, is think of something completely absurd that is very abstract. But for me, it is extremely clear.
Yeah.
Like I can just see it, I can smell it, I can like walk through it. If it was a closet in the room, I could open the closet of it and see how well it was organized and even see the plumbing and the electrical and even what it looks like when you walk into the room and just surf on the surface. I can see it. I can see it from an aerial view. And then I'm able to like almost dissect it on every level. And then most people are like, that's insane. Like what you're thinking of. But I'm kind of like, because I'm almost describing on the surface level.
You're right.
So they're just seeing the surface of it and like, that's pretty crazy. And I'm like, no. I've got the blueprints in my brain. I don't say this to the person, but in my brain, I'm like, I see it top to bottom, the foundation, every level of this idea. And therefore it might take 5 years for that to materialize, but I can almost like see the map to get there. And I'm very, very impatient, which is a part of the problem of seeing that far into the future or seeing what you might want to see materialize. And that becomes a battle because you're like, oh my gosh, I can see this house and I can see exactly how it might be built. And you can't build this house overnight. But when you can see it that clearly, it's difficult to wait for, to live in it. Yeah. That can be rough.
Can I share something with you? It's like part of my discipline of how I work with leaders.
Sure.
I came up with this idea of like, and this is going to be a little vague, but imagine like a spectrum where on one end is pragmatism and the other end is visionary. Mm-hmm. And in the middle is like someone who's equally pragmatic and equally visionary. I find that companies that can scale up and kind of like get ahead of the curve and create that next super cool thing, or just are like consistently cutting edge and do cool things, typically have one or a few leaders that, like, if the far right again was visionary and then over here is pragmatist, they're way over on the visionary side. They can see things that other people can't see. They can just kind of like, it's like I might be showing you the microphone, but actually I'm thinking about what's inside of the microphone. And I'm thinking about how I get all the elements of the microphone and how we could build a better microphone.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Someone who's super visionary can think of those things, but they can't always do the things.
Yeah.
And that's why they need pragmatists. So like someone who's in the middle would be someone who's like a really strong visionary and equally pragmatic. They could actually do the things to make the thing happen.
Yeah.
People who are ultra visionary, they can totally see it, like someone like Steve Jobs, but they couldn't actually build the things or make the things happen.
Yeah.
The further along the visionary scale people get, the more impatient they get, the harder they are to deal with. They tend to be difficult to deal with, not because they're good or bad people, but because they're so far ahead of the conversation and they're like so into the like, well, no, why don't you get what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And so they have to surround themselves with more and more and more pragmatists.
Yeah.
I view myself as someone who's like, I'm not like visionary on that level, but like when you're talking about, you can get this idea and see it all these different levels, but you can also get impatient. The way my team would describe it is I'm usually like, I'm striving to be like 4 feet off the ground or 4 miles off the ground, but they're trying to keep me 4 inches off the ground. They know I need to be off the ground, but they have to hold me down so they can make things actually happen. Yeah. Otherwise I would just like drift off with all the ideas. Yeah.
I see that. I think the thing that I struggle with is that, oh, hold on. That's not the right word. I don't struggle. That's not cool. It's the thing I'm blessed with. It's actually the other way around. It's not struggle. It's blessed. Is that, I grew up doing art. Again, whether I was good at it or not is not the point. I know like how long it takes paint to dry. I know what like a Sharpie versus Krylon versus airbrush versus spray paint. I went to college for graphic design and fashion merchandising and things of that nature. So I to this day know Photoshop inside and out, Illustrator inside and out, InDesign inside and out, Final Cut Pro, Premiere. I can edit, I can like do all that stuff, and I can sit down and do board graphics and drop shadows, you name it. And I know how to draw, And as I get older, I just find more time and more patience with how to do these things. So to a certain degree, I enjoy these things that I was able to learn over these years, from all the way of being a little street kid that used, Sharpies and paint pens, to being, graphic design in college, then having the opportunity to be able to walk through my office and like have people that were better at me than all those things teach me and show me the ways. So what ends up happening that is a good thing most of the time is, especially that I've downsized my life, is that I can like think of an idea and actually from top to bottom execute it with my own two hands. And that is a really amazing feeling now that I took for granted for a really long time, because I was surrounded by so many people and I had such great designers and accountants and lawyers and all these things. But what's crazy is that as you get educated through that process, plus you have the foundation of already knowing how to do a lot of it, it's almost like I went to the school of Harvard of business. And I kind of like finally was able to check myself. And my wife, I have to give her a lot of credit for this, because she was like, you know how to do all that. Why do you have all these other people doing that? You actually know how to do that. You aren't just a delegator. Like, you actually know how to, I always say, a hand on the mouse, because I'm like, when I even hire people, I have a problem with like, do you know how to put your hand on the mouse? Like, do you touch the mouse? And most times they don't. I'm like, I'm not feeling that. Like, you need to touch the mouse. And my hand is like glued to a mouse. And the mouse, meaning it could be a hammer, it could be the mouse itself, but it's sort of a metaphor for, if you lose sight of that and you get away from that, I actually believe, and I'd be curious how you feel about this, because there's something about still understanding the struggle of the craft. And so when you march around the office and you start demanding things, especially people that don't, like consultants becomes I have a lot of problems often with consultants, because I'm like, hold on a minute. You've actually never done this? You've actually never been, you're not an entrepreneur? Have you ever been like the EVP of a company on a day-to-day with like 30 reports and weird emails, and then they're just like, no, went to whatever, got an MBA and I'm a consultant doing this and that. And I'm like, okay, well then all this shit you're trying to tell me to do is completely not valid. Have you ever touched the mouse? And they're like, no, but I've seen a lot of them. And that for me, in my new kind of life, I love the idea of having these crazy ass ideas. And now I've kind of come back to reality, and I'm like, and I'm going to, I have people that help me, but I have no problem, climbing in the basement and doing the wiring and the plumbing and, painting the walls, and then going back to the schematics and the blueprint. And I find a lot of joy in that now.
So, and first of all, I'm loving what we're talking about, but if I was to say where you're at today in your process and who you are, would you say you're equally visionary and equally pragmatic?
No.
What would you say?
I'm definitely more visionary.
You're definitely more
Still
visionary.
more visionary, yeah, for sure.
What you said about like hand on the mouse, I had a moment just the other day. So I started my company getting close to 6 years ago. And then before that, I worked for another coaching company that was just a clown car. And when I say a clown car, it's like the potential was there, but just like, it's like how many crazy shitty ideas can come out of one car. Like, it's like, this is insane. And just like, why would you do that? And I like I said to you earlier, like, it's like I had all this opinion about how shit could be, and then like it's like, well, okay, I have to start my own company, see how it goes now. I learned really fast that I like opinion and experience are two different things.
Absolutely.
So I learned some pretty hard lessons, and they're all super good. But the thing that I did learn is like, oh no, I actually do know what I'm talking about. Like I know psychology super well. My craft as a therapist is like totally on point. I can read people. I can help people switch their understanding, like figure out how they want to like create a good culture or lead a good team or just become a better leader, better person, communicate more effectively. All of that stuff I'm good at. But can I lead a group of people? Can I build up a company and do it in a way where it's like, no, this is actually, I would want to work here. This is cool. Like, it's almost like a musician saying like, I want to be in a band. This guy, Todd Jones, who plays in a band called Nails now, someone asked him, why did you start Nails? He's like, oh, I just wanted to be in a band that I would listen to.
That's exactly right.
And so like,
That's a great,
is this a
100%.
company that I want to work in?
Yeah.
It's cool. But I had a moment the other day where I'm kind of being pushed out of the coaching work now. And I'm doing more just like running the business, kind of like thinking into the future. I'm doing some more stuff like podcasting, working on a book, all of that kind of stuff. And I had this moment of just real deal coaching moment. And one of my team was on a call with me, and I was coaching a CEO who was scaling up a company. I won't get too into the details, scaling up a company, and he'd gotten a 360 feedback report, and there was some like harsh stuff in there, like harsh. And I just walked him through it. I was like, hey, it depends on what you're doing. What's your horizon? Are you going to stay in the company? Are you going to sell, like this and that? And I just decoded it down for him. I was like, this is exactly what you need to do. And you could see this sigh of relief for him. It was like, oh, I thought you were going to give me some crazy consultant mumbo jumbo, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, like, dude, I'm like, I play in a punk band. Like, I'm here to help you figure out what you want to do as a leader. So you do the right things. Just because you've gotten this feedback doesn't mean you have to do something crazy with it, but it just helps you govern your business.
Yeah.
And I had this moment where I was like, whew, I'm not full of shit. Like I still put, in using your terminology, I could still put my hand on the mouse. Like I can still do this, even though I do it less and less.
Yeah.
And afterwards I got off the call with my, my teammate, and they were like, damn, like you really flex some coaching skills there. I hadn't seen you do that. And I was like, honestly, it had been such a long time since I've been in that kind of conversation. I was psyched that I could still pull it off. Yeah. And then I still know what I'm talking about. But I think you could relate to this. As your company gets bigger and it changes, you lose your ability to be in the day-to-day work. Yeah. And that it doesn't make you a bad leader, but it kind of changes the way you engage with the work in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no question. It's funny because, I've been really lucky to have experienced, startup mentality all the way to like publicly traded private equity, all this kind of wild ass business sort of adventure, I suppose. And I think it's difficult to like stay connected to the day to day. It really can be. I think, it's funny because this conversation could go so many different directions. A couple things that came to my mind when you were talking was, one, I think it's really when you start your own business with your own money, right? And you don't, kind of like you said, you had a big reality check of like going and doing your own thing. One thing I think when it comes to like business, and whether you work for a company or you're, to what we're talking about, being a leader within a company, if you start your own business and you start it with your own cash, or, you're borrowing money and it's just like everything's on the line, I think that you carry that with you forever. And so even when the companies I've been involved with or started or whatever the case might be, no matter how big or small, some went out of business, some got big. But no matter what, every time I've ever been engaged with a company, even other people's companies, I look at it, I can't help myself, that it's like you're scraping pennies together, you're going to go out of business the following day. So for example, I used to go to work every day, and to this day, I go to work every day like it's the last fucking day of work. Like I'm like, holy crap, if I make a bad decision today, if anything goes wrong, this might all be gone tomorrow. I come from not a lot of money, a pretty struggling background. So I always have this like heavy fear of going backwards and what that might look like. And I don't want to be there, and I don't want my employees to be there. But again, it really, to me, where I'm going with this is that it makes me always feel like I've got to stay really connected, like keep the tool belt on. Yeah, like keep your fucking tool belt on. Like don't get comfortable, because you might need to reach out and grab that hammer and shit might come undone real quick. So I think anybody that takes their tool belt off and doesn't dust that shit off is like, they got another thing coming. And so I try to personally, and I've seen myself, because this has been a long road, get away from that and like loosen up the tool belt and think I'm going to set it down. And then I realize I shouldn't. So I think it's really important, and you get a lot of respect and respect, not just that you need that, by the way, because you don't necessarily need it. staying in the trenches a bit. And I think that this is a bold statement. And I'm surprised I'm going to talk about this. I have an issue with like leaders that, sit at the end of the table, make sure, they walk in a room and you kind of already know something's up when I go to a company. This just happened recently. And I walk into, I intentionally do this, by the way. I used to sit at the end of the table, so I had that disease. I struggled, and I'd be like, "Why? How dare that person is sitting at the end of the table? Like, what? Who is this new guy? He's sitting at the end of the table. That's my seat. Like, what the hell? Like, who can think like that?" I thought like that. Like, I actually had that problem. I admit it. But now I'll go to a meeting, and I just did this recently. I went to a meeting. There was like 15 people in this meeting. I walk in the room and I was a little late. I like ran to the bathroom or something and came back in, had to get my coffee or whatever. And I go in and I'm like, there's an empty seat at this end of the table here. And then there's an empty seat at the end of the table there, like one for the big guy and one for the other big guy, which is me.
Right.
So I walk in and I'm like, I don't want to sit there. And these people have already been trained because clearly their boss has them sitting so he can have the throne. Mm-hmm. And so immediately I was like, you guys like kind of scoot over. I want to sit like, I want to be able to see everybody and I don't like my back against the door or whatever excuse I made up, but I didn't want to sit at the end of the table. And then the person who I just requested to scoot on, like kind of create a scoot on down situation was pretty uncomfortable because now he's like face to face. And I'm sure his boss is like, why is he sitting there? Why am I looking at this dude who's like, whatever, my assistant's assistant. And now he's at the end of it. Why is Johnny over there? And I just immediately, it just helps me understand the culture in there. And clearly that person may have put their tool belt down.
Yeah. I got to point something out to you, and I do it. And most people do it is like, there's like a voice you put on when you're being like the lame version or like that. I call it my idiot voice when I'm like, blah, blah. You're like, how dare this person?
Totally.
I love the voice because it's like, you're telling a story where you're like, either like, oh God, I can't believe I acted like that. Or I can't believe someone acted like that.
Yeah.
And like the voice for me is always this thing for me where it's like, whatever the people, I call it my idiot voice because it's like either me acting like an idiot or someone else.
I like that.
It's like a clear differentiation of like, this is not who I am now. So I'm going to take on a different voice. It becomes a caricature where we're like, get out of here.
I got to use that. That's an epic thing because I definitely do that. And it's funny for the record, because whoever's listening to this, the person I was whatever, 10, 15, 20 years ago, there's been so many cycles of who I am with business, especially, but even as an adult and a parent and so on. But I do, it's been a really interesting, sometimes shameful, and definitely embarrassing because I look back and I'm like, wow. And when you run a big company, there's so many witnesses to your idiocy, right? You're like, fuck, all these people saw that. Like, that's like if you're in a movie that's like a number one hit and you're like, wow, that movie sucked. But it's like number one on the box office. It's your worst thing you ever did. And you're just selling out theaters of your bad acting job. And with work, I look back on some of my most defining moments. And even like with Element, like where maybe even sometimes when it was the most successful. And I'm like, oh man, I really have maybe regressed. I don't know if it's evolved or regressed, but I have changed in many ways. And I laugh at it. I have to laugh.
Well, dude, that's like, you're figuring it out on the biggest stage, right?
Totally. Like, it's exactly right.
It's like, I'm just trying to figure out how to do this, but in front of all of you. And like, when you said that, I just thought of the first company retreat that we ever did with the company that I run was on Balboa Island. And I had all these notes and I was all prepared, and I'd been a professional at that point for, I don't know, like, let's say 16 years, but I'd never ran my own thing, but I played in bands. I'd done all this stuff. Like, I'm used to being in front of people. And we do this first day of this session, and it's me and my newly formed team. I think there was 3 other people there, four people in total in this house at Balboa. And afterwards I said to one of my coworkers, is a really wonderful person named Jerry. I said, Jerry, how was it? She's like, well, you definitely talked at us for about 6 hours. And I was like, oh God, it's so terrible.
I still do that.
Though, it's like, you just, you're trying to figure it out. And
Yeah.
it was such good feedback. She's like, it was really cool. And it was punishing because like they're all cool ideas, but you're way too much in the visionary space. You're talking like 5 years out when it's like year 1.5 of the company.
Right.
Like, and she gave me really cool feedback. And again, it's that, well, not again, for this podcast, it's the first time we're talking about that super importance of having like really real people around you who will give you total honest feedback
Absolutely.
and your ability to hear it.
Yes.
But I love what you said. You're like, oh God, my most embarrassing moments are in front of all these people.
Yeah.
But it's cool because you can change. Now, I did want to take a step back.
Sure.
Also in your intro, the other thing that you seemed uncomfortable about, you're like, I guess I'm a business person. So it's like both an artist and a business person. And that's such an important part of your story. Do you mind if we start tucking into that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. So why don't you tell us about Element Skateboards? And it's, maybe let's go a little bit further back, but knowing that we're going to go into this, tell us about growing up and how and where you grew up led to what you did professionally.
Okay. Yeah, that's a loaded question, and I can try to do the short version if it's possible.
You can do wherever you want to go with this, and whatever you want to admit or bring in, I'm totally cool with.
Sure. Well, I grew up with pretty dysfunctional family. My parents got divorced at a really young age, and my dad was a hardcore alcoholic, and my parents just had there was just a lot going on there, right? So then I became a kid that grew up, I guess they'd call it a latchkey kid, but for the most part, bouncing back and forth between my mother and father, depending on which family was more dysfunctional. So the truth would be that if my mother's side of the family, when I was living with my mom, let's say, was highly dysfunctional, which it most often was, then I would go and live with my father. And then that would be highly dysfunctional. And then I would go live with my mom again, or go live with a family member, or just live off like couch surfing or whatever as I got older. And I think that combined with one other thing, I think that's kind of, as I reflect back on my youth, that things that kind of shaped me to be unsuccessful as a human and successful. The other thing is my dad was in the military. So with that, all this moving around, even internally between my family and all that dysfunction, the other thing that was happening was we were literally moving around the world because my dad was in the military. So I lived in Germany for 5 years. I lived in Oregon. I lived in New Hampshire. I lived in Virginia Beach. I lived in Atlanta. I've lived in California. I've lived in Ohio. I went to 3 different junior highs, 3 different high schools, and really just within moving internally. So let's just say I lived in Virginia for 3 years. I lived between my mother and my father on the street all over within those 3 years within Virginia. So like there was just this constant like nomadic behavior that I had become accustomed to. So with that, my sort of skills with people were very sharp. They became very sharp because I had to constantly adapt. And I was like always the new kid, always the stranger, always just everything was constantly new to me. And then on top of that, especially as time went on, we didn't have money. I wasn't able to have nice things. And as this all went down, I think the part where we're going with this is that I ended up, after all this sort of moving around, for some reason and it's kind of weird because it's not entirely factual, because I say I'm from New York when people will say, where are you from? I've lived out in California now for a really long time. I lived all over the world as a kid, but I spent the majority of my high school days in New York. And with that, I just started calling myself a New Yorker. I felt like I connected most, I suppose, with New York, both New York City and upstate, the countryside, upstate New York, White Plains, Albany, Schenectady, Syracuse, all the way to like Brooklyn and being in the city and skating the Brooklyn Banks and all that cool New York City stuff that people talk about. And all this was like throughout the 80s. But um, what came from all that is that when I was very young, really 4 years old, my sister was a skater in the 70s. And she, through everything I had just described, she gave me her hand-me-down skateboard when I was 4. And I don't know if it was because of like the size of it, even like we can get into some like actual like why did this thing go around with me? Well, the first thing that's super random that, again, these are things I've been able to look back on and say, okay, well, what if I had gotten into baseball, let's say? I would have had to have joined a team, and then like my parents, this wouldn't have happened, would have had to drive me to practice every day, and there would have been equipment involved and fees and things like that, and a team. Just the whole thing is totally unrealistic with what I just described as my childhood. So you take any sport, and you try to plug it into what I had to go through as a kid, and I don't think anything would have made sense or been a reality. On top of that, a skateboard's like this little thing. You can just put it in your bag, I suppose, and like just carry it around with you. You don't have to change your clothes. And, there was all these, I didn't really think much about that until I got older. Like, oh, well, maybe that's why I kept skating, because anything else wouldn't have made any kind of sense. I wouldn't have been able to do it. And so thank God I picked up a skateboard when I was 4 and just started tic-tacking around. And, we'd move and I'd be like, all right, did I pack my skateboard? Like, that's all I can take with me because I got to go stay with dad for next 4 days. And I got to go move to New York now. And like, I got to live out of a fucking duffel bag for the next 10, 15 years or whatever the heck that was. So I got this skateboard, and everywhere I would go, especially as I got older, there was a community and there were people there, and there was, skate at that time. There weren't skate parks, there were skate spots, and I would like start going and hanging out. And whether it was Virginia or New York or even New Hampshire, for gosh sakes, all these things, there was always like a micro skate scene. And because of that, if everything I described of having to adapt and get used to being the new high school kid and all, and it was so difficult, like to get in there with like whatever the jocks and the popular kids or what, but skateboarding was like communal. So like even now, I barely know anyone I went to high school with or junior high. Like there's a few people out there. I could like literally count them on this hand. And I still like, it's funny. That's why I like Instagram. I still DM and talk to some of these people. So I've got to do a shout out to Manuel Bandy and X-Man. And there's like people that like were not actually skate people. They were like different. It was different. And there was very few of those because it was all skaters. Like it was just skate community. So I would just leave high school, like not know a soul, and just go downtown and be with a bunch of skaters from all different high schools that had, to a certain degree, similar backgrounds. So in a nutshell, that is like my kind of upbringing. The only other thing I'd say, and we talked about this earlier, was music was a huge factor in all of this because I got really deep into hip hop and punk rock and had a really strong connection, especially with hip hop and reggae. I definitely like punk rock music. But I was really, and maybe this, again, going back to like reflecting on it, it was maybe too aggressive and too like chaotic for me because I was so much chaos in my own life that maybe a mosh pit was almost too much for me. Although I was in plenty of them and went to plenty of punk rock shows because the hip hop shows were within the punk rock shows back then. So I loved rap. I loved hip hop. And that also became a big part of like this life that I'm describing. But in the same breath, because I love that kind of street lifestyle and that skate lifestyle, there's no question I got mixed up in a lot of other stuff that was not so hot, not so cool. And I was around a lot of rough things, between being in my house that was incredibly rough and then being in the streets with skateboarding in the 80s in New York or in mostly urban environments. That also was rough. And we had talked about this earlier, like real lots of street smart starting to happen because you have to have that. Like skating in the Bronx banks, not the Brooklyn banks, the Bronx banks in the 80s, or skating the Brooklyn banks in the 80s, or upstate New York in Albany. You had to have a lot of street smart because you were dealing with a lot of crazy stuff. And you kind of combine that with the punk rock hip hop community, and you start getting uh, a lot of character building, right? So kind of fast forward with I'm skipping over college and all that stuff because I want to get to Element. Um, what happened with Element was more so that I had such a crazy taste in my mouth of like, wow, this culture is pretty fucked up. Like I have had friends that died. I've saw things that were crazy. The fact that like drinking and drugs and partying and pretty much like wildly out of control shit happening within the skateboard community. Um, and that's okay. Like I understand a lot of it. I participated in a lot of it too. But there was a time as I got older and I had seen so much loss and pain, especially within my own personal life, that I'd become a bit of a workaholic, and maybe that's something we can talk about if you want. Um, and I was like, okay. At that point, I was an artist, and I talked about that earlier. And I was doing a lot of art and I was a good skater. I had been sponsored. I knew what it was like to travel. Um, I knew the skate community inside and out, plus music, and then I had a lot of good friends and lots of great connections because of all this traveling, whether it was through skateboarding or even through moving around so much. I just had developed relationships everywhere. And back to being a curator, uh, I was like, if I curate something now, I need to do it differently. Like, I don't want to be responsible for all the shit that's going on right now. Like, it's basically screwed up my life. And I thought what was funny about it, I've been talking about this a lot recently, is, and I don't like bringing up the word poser. Poser's weird, but so many people want to get close to a culture that they actually need to be further away from, right? Like if you're part of like hip hop's a good example, but skateboarding for sure. Like, there's so much stuff about like gnarly skate stuff that like we kind of need to clean it up. But the people from the outside, it becomes somewhat attractive. And so they want to get in and like you're like, no, 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 no. We're trying to get out. Like you should be wanting to pull us out, not push us in. And that gets back to like that corporate culture because they're like, oh, we want to buy this company. It's super rad and it's got, this and that. And you're like, hold on, guys. I was kind of hoping you'd come in here and help fix it, not make it worse. So with Element, it was like, I want to build a brand that we are getting out and becoming better people. And we're leading by example and we're doing things that are positive because I'm such a workaholic and my whole life is work. If I don't incorporate something into my work, then it won't become a reality in my life because it has to be part of my work, especially back then. So I was like, okay, well, if I need to change, I'm going to change it through my daily activities in the office. So if I'm going to be doing things, it needs to be positive and can't be like negative at work because I'm part of the skate community and things are super gnarly. And we got to make it like raw. And then I'm going to go home and like meditate and do yoga and don't drink alcohol anymore and like make smoothies and then go back to work and be like, I'm gnarly, like that's kind of like what would have been the choice.
Right.
And I said, I'm going to do something and make big change. And that was like sort of the catapult to like the DNA and what Element was for me and what I needed to leave behind. And I remember a lot of people, and this, by the way, I mean, like I said earlier, I talk a lot. I find it so fascinating that no matter how much success people have, that whether it's skating or business, that people continue to think that it's a bad idea. I find that just one of the most fascinating things. And I try so hard to put myself in that other person's position.
That what's a bad idea?
Like starting Element. So what I'm saying is it was such a different perspective on skateboarding. And then the fact that everyone was like, hold on, you're going to do what? And this is what? And like, and you're like, yeah, what? Like, doesn't that make sense? And they're like, no, like, and the amount of team riders and partners and things throughout my life that people like exit or like aren't into it and leave or question and stay and question and stay. And then you're like, hey, you've been here for this long. You're still questioning this? Like, didn't your check clear? Like, so last time I checked, the money's still hard, correct? Yeah, but it's still a bad idea. Well, then get the fuck out.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just
Wait,
deviated.
can I hit on that, man?
Sure.
You know, I was talking about my old company, the old company I worked at. I was like this total clown car. I was the worst version of what you just said, though, right? Like, I'm this dude in there that's like, this is bullshit. We shouldn't do this. Bad culture. And I wasn't wrong. Like, I wasn't wrong. But I also was only filled with opinion. 0% experience running an actual real deal business.
It's great you can admit that.
Oh, it took me a long time to get here. And like, I think I only really got here in the past couple of years, like with a lot of reflection, is that like my old boss, I think, is just a shitty person. Don't like him. Saw him. We'd probably have negative words. Just don't think he's a good guy. However, who's shittier? That guy for running a company that I feel were practical concerns about, or me staying at that company for 5 years, hating it, made me miserable being there. I was super depressed, probably not the most unhappy part of my life, but it's what set the stage for my most unhappy part of my life. Complained about it, negative, always questioning everything. It's like, hey man, like if you hate it so much, why don't you just leave? And in fact, why don't you leave right now? Or why don't you leave next week? Or why don't you leave next year? But instead to stay and take up space and be negative. And I'd like to say that I was helping set the company up for what I think they've gone on to become, and which I believe is a better company. I think I might have played some role in that. Or maybe that's just my ego saying like, hey, you were helping them become a better company. And I can't say whether or not they are a better company, but my rationale at the time was like, I'm going to have the hard conversations. I'm going to point out the flaws. I'm going to do this stuff. I'm going to help them change. Yo, it's not your company, man. Like, why are you staying here? Why are you being that squeaky wheel that no matter how much grease gets put on there, you're still squeaking? And one of the things, I guess, is to suggest to people who are listening here, it's like, hey, like, there's nothing wrong with thinking your company's not cool. Like, there's problems with your company, and there's nothing wrong with bringing up challenges and to work to make them better. But maybe the question you should start with is, will I actually be okay here? Will I ever be happy with this? Or will it be problem after problem after problem? Because maybe I'm not supposed to do this, or maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Because if everything's an issue for you, but the money's okay, then who's really the bad guy here?
That's right.
And the reason I'm pointing this out is what you said is like, I had such a reality check about that a few years ago where, I had a challenge with an employee, and I was really thinking about it. I was like, you know what? Until you get behind the steering wheel and you put your own money in, you take your own risk, it's hard to understand what it really means to run a company and why things happen. Up until that point, you can have a lot of opinions, and those opinions can be totally cool. But if you choose to stay in a positive way, help things happen, bring up ideas, listen to the explanation, work for change. And if you can't be in that space, then you probably just shouldn't be there, and you should probably head out. Yeah. Sorry, I'm stepping out of your story there, but I think it was such an important thing to hear. And I also want to be vulnerable and be honest that I've been that dude in a company.
Well, a great quote that actually an employee had told me was, if you don't like something, stick around long enough to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great way to look at things. And I believe like what, I know I've steered away from the original question, but gratitude is huge. And I think that like, that's something that has taken me a long time, and I'm still on a crazy personal journey with these type of things. But what I find with what we're talking about is that, and this is, to the listeners, because, as I'm talking, I forget so many people would be listening to this. But I think a really important self-reflection that people should do, especially in your professional environment, but this applies to personal life too, is that, and there's so many employees that I can think of that had this sort of hang up, but you need to, like, I believe in the glass half full situation is that it's important to look at what's going on around you, and first, like, look at what's good. Like, okay, these people are paying me. I have a job. Mm-hmm. I applied for a job here. I came to them most often. I dreamed of working here. Mm-hmm. I went there hoping they would accept me, and they did. Mm-hmm. I should be grateful for that. Mm-hmm. The check is good. I should be grateful for that. Even though my boss might be an asshole, he's here. He came to work today. Like, he's present. He is involved with the company. He has an opinion. He makes decisions. People don't understand how hard it is to make a decision. I mean, I find it, I think, you know, if I were to say, if someone were to say, what's your most strongest business attribute? I'd say, I'm not afraid to make decisions. If anything, I make decisions, right or wrong. I'm not afraid to make them. And oftentimes I will sit and look at someone and be like, well, what do you want to do? Like, make a decision. And I'm actually flabbergasted by how often people cannot make decisions, and they're terrified, and they'll be like, I don't know. Well, what do you think? And I'm like, I say no. I say no too. And you're like, oh man, come on, give me a break. Like, I want, so I guess what I'm saying, back to the gratitude, is that it's really important to, and I try to do this every day now, of like, okay, well, that sucks. Like, I'm not stoked on that. But at the same time, like, back up. How's my life? Like, how is my actual life right now? Like, let's go bigger and think broader. How's my life? Okay, I got up this morning. I'm healthy. I didn't fight with my wife, let's say, and we had a great morning, and we kissed each other when we went off to do our thing, hugged my kids. I'm not stressed out, generally speaking. And you know, you just kind of go through the life tick list. And then I'm like, so do I really give a shit about that situation at work because the person's doing this or that? Like, the world is sort of operating in a way currently for me or whomever I'm talking about. This is like this reflection that someone should do real quick and be like, okay, before I go crazy in this meeting, let's check everything. Not just this meeting, everything. Because the universe is working in a particular way where you're like, hold on a minute, what's this really about? Is my life okay? First and foremost, because you can't change other people's lives until your life's okay. So is my life okay? Yeah, actually, today's a really good day. Fuck it, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Or apply good things to the situation and not like be like, I don't like this and I don't like that. Because really, like, step back and be like, I wish I look back on so many moments, and I wish I could look, because again, as an evolution as a human, I wish I could look back at some of those people and be like, hey, hold on a minute. How's your day going? What's going on in your life? Didn't you just get custody of your kid and like things are looking pretty good? And I just thought, didn't you just get a new car? Like, bro, pump the brakes. Something we're doing is working here. Something you're doing is working here. And I really believe it's all kind of intertwined now. Like you'll climb out. Like, if it's something at work that's going like in a bad way, I kind of feel like the whole universe has to sort of be in harmony to get out of that hole. And it's not just in the office, because everybody has to be working with each other on all sides, 360 degrees, for it to elevate itself into success.
Could I give you a term to consider
Sure.
in that? One, just as a funny thing, it's like what you're talking about is like I believe it's something I've been working on, is like, you know, positive mindset, and especially since starting my own company and really being like having to hold up a mirror and being like, Jesus, you know, like, all right, now I really got to put my money where my mouth is, like literally. I've gotten way better of like kind of sitting there, like kind of having the gratitude. But literally just the other day, I was in a meeting. I was sounding off. I'm being negative. I'm kind of like stomping my foot, you know, like, you know, being all like pissy about something. And I got off the call and I was like, that wasn't productive. And we had a consultant who's working with our company. So we're a consulting firm who has a consultant come in and helping us with some financial stuff. And I got off that call and I was like, that's not who I am today. That's like maybe who I was 7 years ago. Why did that person come in? So I'll bring in the term I was talking about. Have you ever heard the term target fixation? It's a World War I term. When planes started becoming like aerial combat became a thing, pilots would get fixated on shooting down another plane, and they would forget their environment, and they would like fly into the ground, or like fly into a cliff, or fly too low and get shot down by like ground forces, because they would forget all of their other environment. All they would care about is trying to get that other thing. So when I talk about target fixation, I use it in what you're talking about. It's like, yo, like, why are you freaking out about this financial thing? Like, take a step back, look around you. Like, your life is sick. There are a lot of cool things going on. You know, wonderful people. You've made positive changes. This thing matters, but it doesn't matter to the degree you're putting overt focus on it. You're getting target fixation on it,
Hmm.
and you're flying into the cliff, or you're flying into the enemy fire, which is the thing that fucks up your life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. It completely, especially with other employees, they would, yeah, they'll just point out a particular flaw that just completely is on the scale of what we're trying to achieve is not great. And yeah, they're not having gratitude for the bigger picture, you
Yeah.
know. So that's been that's a good takeaway. Actually, I like that. I have target fixation now because of getting having our boards in Target, and I'm very fixated on that. So I know what target fixation is when it comes to business.
No, man. Yeah, like, dude, when we think about gratitude, like, and you know, something we were talking about earlier and we were joking about on the break, it's like so grateful for, and I'm laughing about it because I'm going to stop. I actually am very grateful for all the stuff. I'm grateful to be sitting here with you today. I'm
Yeah.
super psyched on the company, get to do these things, but also as a boss, you're like, there are days where it's like, God, it would be so much easier to work for someone else. Knowing what I know now, it would be easier to work for
Yeah.
someone else.
Yeah. Well, you know what can be hard too is that for in my situation, for many years I worked for myself, started my own stuff, had great partners and terrible partners, but we were privately held. It was my own business, and I know what that feels like to be responsible for your own decisions. And then to then be sell your business or be part of a public company or private part of private equity, it's a bit of a bait and switch because you think you own your company, you think you're the CEO, you think you're the president, you think you're the boss, and you're like, oh, this freedom is sick. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I don't have freedom. Like this is like I gotta do this and I gotta do that. I gotta like speak to shareholders and make sure these guys are stoked. And then uh so I know what it's like to work for yourself for sure with your own money and then work for someone else where you're kind of a puppet, you know, like you sort of work for yourself but you kind of don't, because if you make
Yeah.
the wrong step or move you get called out. And then going back to my current life working 100% for myself again, it's a really interesting dynamic because I can reflect back on being part of a larger organization and what that might look like being a fake boss,
Mhm.
right?
Totally. Well, so let's go back with Element. You know, you make this move, you make this decision,
Hmm.
and what, from a business perspective, what were the early days of Element like?
Uh, a lot of, you know, it's funny because first off, a lot of struggle, a
Mhm.
lot of politics, lots of struggle. Definitely at the time, Element came out. So I look back on the fact that we did it in the early 90s. And that to really in skateboarding was like the worst time ever. Like as companies were just going out of business and skateboarding was just plummeting back when like it was sort of that era when skateboard wheels were tiny and like skateboarding tricks were like low to the ground and the economy was crashing and skateboarding just wasn't that attractive because it was just going into a like almost like a look and you know because as tricks change like people go really high and do big airs and like let's say vert's really popular, then like the masses are like, whoa, that's really cool, I want to look at that, and skateboarding gets popular. Well, skateboarding was going through a period where it was like cool to skaters but the outside world didn't have much interest in it. So the early days of Element, because it had started in the early 90s, it was a struggle, like from a financial standpoint, from like the outside world, even like people around me, like, you do what? Like you're going to make a living doing what? So there was a level of that from non-skaters, family, non-skaters, etc. Then there was just a level of that within like just business was terrible. But also the early days of Element too, because skateboarding was very kind of what I was explaining earlier, was very street.
Mhm.
Street skating for one, but also just street. Like the brands and the magazines, whether it be Thrasher or Big Brother magazine, and these things that were happening inside skateboarding were the antithesis of Element. Like we could not the difference between who we were and what we were trying to do as a brand and what the industry was doing, we got a lot of hate.
Mhm.
You know, we got a lot of hate. People thought I was like just, you know, on a judgment level for me. I was called a poser often because one, I was coming from like being like a shut New York kind of guy, and all of a sudden I'm like hippy dippy element, save the earth, and people didn't kind of realize I'd like really gone through a big transition as a person, um, and that was in my life, at least at that time, that was real to me, and the brand. So we had a big kind of disconnect with the industry at the time, so that was rough because everything was pretty hardcore, and we were very like just earthy,
Yeah.
an earthy brand. And that was really hard, along with the fact that especially I was Element was part of like an industry that just didn't see it the way I saw it. And that was tough even with the team riders. I have to give the team riders a lot of props because what had happened that maybe I wasn't nearly as aware of then that I am now. And I mean, I'm glad they all stayed on most of them stayed on the team and we had like a great thing going. But what that I didn't really know was happening is that to a certain degree, that level of bullying, let's call it, or people kind of hating on the brand in the beginning, they had to endure that. So they were being loyal to the brand and loyal to myself. And they were catching a lot of shit in the industry, like you should write for this brand, not that brand, and la la la. And they would stay. And so there was a lot of hate's a strong word, but it was tough in the beginning. And then I was poor. I was already poor prior to that, and I was poor when we were doing it. So I remember I was living in when Element had started, I was living in the office. But even when I lived in a studio apartment, I didn't have a car. I took the bus to work. Had no money. And then any type of money that I had was just being poured back into either the company or just barely getting by.
Could I ask you a practical question?
Sure.
First, and only what you're comfortable sharing, like how did you, because you said you didn't have any money, you didn't come from money. How did you found it financially?
Well, the beautiful news is that two individuals that I owe so much to, or I'm super grateful for, is Paul Schmidt and Steve Douglas. And at the time, Paul Schmidt had PS Sticks, which is a wood manufacturer, and Steve Douglas was part of New Deal and a whole bunch of other skateboard brands throughout his life. And I rode for New Deal. I was one of my sponsors when I was a kid, and Paul had this wood shop. And so to a certain degree, they floated it, they floated the business. And so Paul, because he was able to make all those boards, they floated the whole company. And that is how things got kicked off in the beginning. And it was tiny. I mean, just tiny. And Paul and Steve it's funny because, I can joke around because I got paid like nothing, but they were nice enough to like especially Paul with respect to that wood shop. I mean, he just carried not just Element. Paul Schmidt, and I want to give this guy a lot of credit. Paul Schmidt, on the sort of on the down low, has carried so many skateboard companies for so many years behind the scenes. He would always say, and I never quite understood it until now that I'm older, but he was the facilitator. That's what he called himself. And it's true. Paul just was like so kind and had done so well through having his wood shop that he had the means to let people pay their bills really late, and in many cases not ever even pay them. So Paul just floated many companies, and Element being one of those companies where he was just very generous with that. And at the time, Element just made skateboards. So that was kind of easy. You just don't pay Paul till you have the money. Right. And that worked. And that was amazing. And Paul, to this day, should get credit for that because he did it. I'm not going to mention the brands. And I mean, to this day, he still does it.
Right.
And that's just out of the kindness of his heart and how much he loves skateboarding. He has been the incubator of countless skateboard brands and entrepreneurs. Yeah.
So did you have a blueprint of how to like start a company essentially? Because you've been around a lot, you've been sponsored. So like, how did you figure out like, how do I get distribution? Like, how do I market? Like, how do I like get ad space? How do I get people to even know about this brand? Was there a little bit of a blueprint, or were you just figuring it out as you went along?
The big thing would be, back to Steve and Paul. Steve Douglas was extremely educated in international affairs. He's from England. And so Steve was a professional skateboarder, and he had traveled all over the world. And the fact that he was from England, he had like a lot of like love for Europe. And so Steve had already had a lot of like nice connections in Europe. But again, it's very important to state that skateboarding was tiny. So a lot of times when I tell this story, people start imagining like distribution centers and skate shops everywhere and the way skating is today. We're talking like people like literally had like a garage in like New Zealand, and they would like open up the back and like huck skateboards out of the back. I mean, it was so like entrepreneurial and startup style and on all levels of skateboarding back then. It was crazy. There was no X Games, there was no Olympics and skateboarding and commercials, like none of that shit. So we had an international presence because Steve made that possible. I had gone to college. I mean, that's something that's kind of weird. I don't talk a lot about having an education because in our industry, it's not that common. So I was educated. So
what did you do in college?
I studied graphic design, merchandising, and illustration, fashion illustration. And I graduated with, it's called visual communications at the Art Institute of Atlanta. So I did know how to use computers. I knew about marketing. I did have a level of education. Plus I worked my whole life. I worked at skate shops. I like knew about silk screening. I knew about like, I was a sponsored skater too. So I knew about graphics. I knew about like traveling and working it with sponsors and being at a shop and being like, hey, you should carry this brand. And I was hucking the brands. I was like, to the sponsors that I had at the time, I was like one of their favorite team riders, not because I was the best skater, because I was really good at like going into a shop and being like, hey, why don't you have New Deal boards here? You should have New Deal boards, and go do the demo and then be like, oh, everybody here buy a New Deal board. I was just that kind of guy. And so that gave me I think, awareness to, and I'd mentioned this, and I was in music and kind of around the hip hop industry, and kind of saw like I'd done some a lot of graphic design and work inside the music industry. Plus, I interned at a graphic design studio, and our number one account was Coca-Cola. So I had these things that like were very uncommon to like a street skater, like kid from New York. And so I applied all that, to answer your question, into the business, and kind of stumbled along the way, and really just mirrored a lot of my favorite companies too. I should mention that Rodney Smith, Bruno Musso, and this guy by the name of Nick Hartman were these three individuals on the East Coast that were like pioneers of skateboarding. And I watched these guys like a hawk, especially Rodney Smith and Nick. And everything they did, I just found I was very fascinated by the management of skateboard companies. Like Nick was like just a great, he ran a skate shop called Concrete Beach out of Albany, New York at the time. And Rodney and Bruno are the founders of Shet Skates, which then later became Zoo York. And I skated with those guys in the Shet team all the time. And I was fascinated by how Rodney and Bruno kept the scene just so tight, and how they treated their riders, and how Shet was like dominating New York and the East Coast at the time. And so I actually had a really big impact on me. And so when I went on to do Element and many other companies, I always had this in my brain of like, this is how these guys do it. This is how they ran a team that was borderline like the Bones Brigade of the East Coast. And that became like my business model. Shet was a huge factor in how I wanted Element to operate, because it was inspired a lot by Shet Skates.
So at what point did things start to change from being this like, you had nothing, you had no money, you're living in the office, to you're like, oh, actually we're gaining traction. We're actually becoming a business.
Repeat it one more time. I want to answer it clear.
At what point did it transition from being this like passion project where you're just like pushing it uphill and you're not making any money, to becoming a business that's self-sustaining and actually starting to grow?
It was a really long road. So people think maybe, when you look back on it, it happened overnight. It was really like, brick by brick. I mean, it was a brick by brick situation where It started out really small. The industry got a little more traction and skateboarding was becoming more popular. And we had like done the hard work in the beginning. So we had survived and built a really strong business early on. So we had that architecture in place through the roughest time. So then by having that sort of that like, I guess you would almost compare it to like your core here. So we had a really strong core. And so then when skateboarding was growing, we were ready for it. We were ready for it. We really had we were sharp. So we were able to ship product during the time when the demand was starting to be created. We had a brand, which I believe was important because it was friendly and it was kind, and it really was starting to speak to where skateboarding, and as it was getting more popular, if you're like a parent or even a shop and you're like, I don't know what decision to make. Should I carry this or that? And you're like, Element's pretty safe and it's dope. And it's also not offensive. And I just opened up the shop. I just got through all these hard times. I'm not going to take a lot of chances. And maybe I'm not giving Element enough credit because the way I'm kind of describing, like, but I think that was a big part of it. And it was like this positive brand. And I was really starting to like come out of my shell too, and really starting to feel a lot more comfortable with my role in the company. And that I think was a big thing because I was like Element's biggest sort of fan. In the early days, going back to those insecurities as an artist, I had a lot of those insecurities as an entrepreneur. So that kept me from being like out there really like claiming what this company means. And there was just like a point, I think, where all of a sudden I just decided I'm going to really put myself out there and really start being more engaged with the community, the businesses, go to these trade shows. Like I had literally avoided trade shows like the Black Plague. I just didn't want to go to them. I had like a lot of social anxiety, which, we had mentioned mental health earlier, which I would not mind touching on because I think it's important to the listeners. But I had a lot of struggles on that side of things. And so I think one of the turning points for Element was me coming to terms with a lot of that too, getting myself out there. And then that like led to the company. I would go to a Zoomies meeting and be like, this is what you need to do. Like, this is the brand and this is why it's dope. And, a lot of founders weren't doing that at the time and really getting super involved. And I think that actually helped quite a bit. I'm not trying to take credit away from anyone at all, but it's not common back then that I would just be in every meeting, every decision, everything. I was always there, always engaged with the team, traveled with the team, skated with the team, went to every meeting, went to every Zoomies 100K, every flipping thing. I was just there. So it was just like hammering this business any which way I looked. I was just part of it. And then skateboarding was growing in popularity and I was just prepared and ready to roll. And a ton of great timing. I think a classic story is that I was doing yoga and I went to a yoga class. I'll never forget. I saw a woman in the yoga class wearing an Element shirt. And I was like, okay, like something's going on right now. Like this is it. Like you're doing something right. And I think it's funny because in skateboarding, most people would have like, especially the way the industry is. And that's a huge problem in the industry, by the way, from a business standpoint, because I actually think this is what really separated Element from the pack is that I looked at that moment as a defining moment of awesomeness.
Yeah.
I'm in a yoga class in Newport Beach and there's a woman in my yoga class who does not fit the demographic whatsoever. And she's rocking an Element shirt. And most people, especially even today, this would happen. They'd be like, whoa. Like, I just saw a woman going back to the glasses half full and being grateful. Bro, I was just in a yoga class, or my wife was in a yoga class, her girlfriend, and she just came home and she saw someone in an Element shirt. What are we going to do? That's skateboarding, right? What are we going to do? We got to change shit. Yeah. And I was like, yo, I was in a yoga class today and there was a woman wearing a Element shirt. Guys, we're doing something right.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, the irony is hilarious because that's, going to what I'm doing today with Target and things like that. Like, I look at those things like base hits. Like, I'm like, man. Hell yeah. What are we trying to do? Keep this all to ourselves?
Totally.
What the hell is that going to do?
Totally, man.
And that's skateboarding culture. But
Um,
I'm so good at deviating from the
no,
question.
I mean, I love that. Can I give you an example from my life?
Sure.
So I grew up playing music, and although I was a therapist, I always was kind of like more focused on playing in bands, even though I'm a terrible musician. But after like kind of like my main band broke up, where I'd been like the guy who kind of did everything, facilitated everything, and we'd gotten to kind of, like within a very small world, we'd gotten into like kind of a cool spot within that small world before the band broke up. So I was at a show years later, and I'm talking to this dude who played in a band that we had done some shows with. Him and I are chilling, and he's like, "God, you're actually like a pretty funny guy." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, everyone just kind of thinks," this is like, and I hate when people do this. It's like everyone. It's like, well, who are you? Like, the town reporter? Like, what do you mean everybody? It's like, everyone just always thinks you're just like this business guy. You're just like numbers and figures and next show and getting to the blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and he's like, "I always just thought you were a business guy, but like, you're like a cool dude." And for a moment, I was like, who the fuck is this guy? And then I took it back. I took a pause, and I was like, hey man, doing anything requires one person, and hopefully more than that one person, but at least one person to take responsibility for that thing happening. Whether you're going to go have sandwiches with your friend, or whether you're going to go be in a band, or you're going to start a company. If you're in the right situation, it's you and everyone else you're doing with it, all working together at the same level or degrees of the same level, creating that thing.
Yeah.
If you're not in a great situation, it's one person, and that one person gets it in a way the rest of those people do not get it.
Yeah.
But that one person is an outsider. That maybe they're like the jerk of the band, or they're like the business guy of the band, or like they're the jerk friend, or they're this or that. And I walked away from that conversation, and like we ended up having a good conversation, but I walked away thinking like, I'm just a different cat. And there are scenarios where I can be in where I don't need to do that at all. It's like, hey, let's hang out, let's have sandwiches, you drive it. I don't care, like whatever. But anything that I think is worth doing that I'm into, I want to play all in, and I want people on my left and right who want to do that as well.
Exactly.
And if you can't do that, no problem. That's totally cool. But I'm also at a place in my life where I'm comfortable enough to say, if you can't do that, you should probably choose something else.
Yeah.
Or you're or you don't get a vote, basically.
Yeah.
It's like, you can, if you want to be all in, you get a vote. Your vote is equal to mine. We're going to do it. If you don't want to, if you're not all in, hey, maybe you should go somewhere else, or come along for the ride and your opinion's not needed. Like, just get in.
Yeah.
And getting to that place really took a lot of deep reflection for me, of just being like, you get told like you're intense, or like pushing things too much, or like, like, why are you driving this? Why are you controlling this? It's like, well, if I don't, who will? Who else is going to do it?
Yeah.
I got to this point where I was like, bring people that want all in. And when I'm hearing your story, I'm like, oh, like being in all those meetings, I would do that. That's what I would do. And that's why you went on to do so much incredible stuff with Element. I do want to hit on something, unless you wanted to comment on what I just said.
No, I'm good. That's just fine. I'm reflecting on what you're saying and what I was talking about, because I find humor in so many, because you were talking about being funny.
Yeah.
And I'm actually think that story is quite funny, because I remember it so well, of how it was like everyone was like, just touching back on it, is that they thought it was a negative thing, and how I just came in like so excited. And it was like, wonk, wonk, wonk.
Dude, as soon as you said that, I'm like, that's so sick. And then you said the other side, I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. You forget, right? You forget that that's what you're dealing with. And I think that applies to just a lot of industries, because you got to be thinking and hoping outside the box.
Okay. So Element starts because you did that work early on. You had like, what I'd say, like the company had good bones.
Exactly.
Because you suffered through that time.
Exactly.
You built a good company. Starts growing. You're figuring it out. At what point do you start realizing you need to work on your leadership?
Man, I don't think I ever knew I was a leader till later. When I realized I was a leader, I needed to be a leader, was, well, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but that's actually not true. I'll throw people under the bus if it's necessary. But I had really been around some crazy leaders, like some pretty wild stuff. And I won't say they were bad leaders, because honestly, I look back on some of these leaders that I thought were bad at the time, that I had I definitely have a problem with authority. I've always had a problem with authority. That's just how, I feel bad for anyone that's had to work work over top of me
Mhm.
because I have an issue just in general, and it's a lot of times my problem
Mhm.
that it's not there. So I'm very difficult to manage.
Mhm.
Um, so I started seeing these qualities in people that I really had a problem with. And then I guess maybe I started realizing, like, hold on a minute, I'm a leader. Like I have to deal with this. I can't, and I don't want to be like these guys because it really upsets me. Like whether it was a partner or a meeting I had with seeing another leader that did things that really bothered me. And I started realizing I needed to sort of like become a better leader. So it's almost like I realized I was a leader when I realized I needed to be a better leader because I never realized I was a leader. And then I'm like, holy shit, I'm leading people the same way these other guys are.
Mhm.
And because I come from sort of nothing with respect to like my background, I don't think I really ever thought of myself as a leader or becoming a leader because it was sort of like I didn't have a choice. I had to run this company. I just automatically started. I didn't apply for a job as a leader. Like that happens. People like I'm going to apply. You're applying for jobs and you're working your way up through the system to become. I'll never forget. Actually, this is an interesting one. I was talking to a person and I was like, "Hey, how do you like determine your success?" Because this is like a guy that was like high up in the food chain of board riders, or no, it wasn't board riders, it was GSM, which is like the holding company at the time for Billabong and Element and Nixon and Ruka, and like I mean, it was just ridiculous. And this was like one of the top dogs on the board there. And I was like, how do you know when you're successful or a great leader? And his answer was get as many people to report to you as possible. You should have as many reports as possible. That's how you know if you're successful and also a great leader. And I'm like, that's not the answer I was. I was like,
man.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of when I realized like, oh shit, like I do have a lot of people reporting to me. I am a leader, and like that's not the answer. So um I don't know. I guess it's almost like I'm starting to realize now that I was a leader.
Mhm.
I don't even know if I knew I was a leader when I was leading,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense.
Dude, it makes like there's so much stuff. Like looking back, because again, I grew up terrible. I have a terrible problem with authority. Horrible,
Yeah.
horrible. And I did the thing as a kid. You like work at a grocery store, and I'm always like challenging, like we should do this with the bags. It's like, yo, kid, chill out.
Right,
Like you're gonna work here for like a year. Nobody's even gonna remember you exist.
Yeah.
Um, like there's these moments where you're like, I want to lead, and then there's moments where like, oh shit, I've been leading. And
Yeah.
like when I was a kid, I always wanted to get out in front of things. I wanted to make things better. I wanted something to happen. And I'll attach it to mental health. Like I grew up in so much chaos when I was young, and my parents are lovely people, but they just like the situation. I won't have some huge conversation, but the situation was we had serious mental health in the house. My dad got laid off when I was very young and kind of like never really recovered from it, and that was separate from the other mental health thing. My mom ended up being the matriarch of the house, and which was cool for me to experience like in the 80s, you grow up with this kind of like male dominated idea of the world. It was great to see that confronted. My mom was the breadwinner, but she had a huge amount of pressure put on her at that point. And then there was other mental health stuff going on. I got bullied a ton as a kid. I was constantly fighting. I grew up looking at the system and just wanted to tear everything down always, but stupid shit. Like, what do we do with the bags at the grocery store? Like,
Sure.
I was constantly looking for stuff because I was looking to lead. And
Challenging everything.
Totally. And if I reflect back, it's that I want a heightened amount of control in my life. And I viewed if you're the boss, then you control things. If you control things, nothing bad's going to happen to you. And you can keep bad things from happening to other people, which is not true. That's just not the reality. And then at one point, I just found myself to be a leader. I was like, oh shit, I'm actually leading all this stuff I didn't intend to lead. And, when I started this company, I didn't start it like, I'm going to start a company. It's just like, oh shit, I guess I'm starting a company. And suddenly I'm in this place where it's like there's a stillness and more of a calmness about it, where I can more hone the art of leadership instead of trying to be like, I need to lead. It's like, oh, well, how do I want to lead? And like, was I cool there, or do I need to roll that back? Why am I anxious about this? Why am I overtly confident about that? And so the reason I asked you about this is because like you literally took Element from like this teeny thing all the way up to a place where it's like it's gone on to a whole other level. We'll wait for that part of the story. At what point did you realize there was stuff about your leadership that you loved and there was stuff you had to work on?
I mean, there's a couple things. I think being a part of a public company is a huge factor in all that, because you have the, like, all of a sudden enter HR, and you realize it's funny because people hate on HR, right? And I think it's a actual necessity in a large corporate environment, especially, but I think in any environment, like having some level of like, checks and balances with how you treat your people, even if you don't agree. It's just a reality of business. Everybody's different. So when we were part of a public company, and I would find myself, I'm very passionate. I think that was when I think a couple flaw. I definitely realized I was a leader and knew I had to like hone in, as you would say, on my skills, was really more from like negative stuff. So like I would step out of a meeting and kind of have to reflect on like, wow, I was like walking around, like raising my voice, even because I'm excited, typically excited. Not often like in anger or anything like that. That would happen on occasion, but really more just like, okay, you got to control your emotions. Like, I mean, even in this moment now today, like I can catch myself getting like really emotional and caught up in the excitement of the discussion. But when you're in a large group setting, you have to lead by example, and you also have to realize that not everyone in that room can relate to that situation. So there would be times I would walk out of a meeting and be, maybe later that night, or I had a couple close colleagues that would probably talk to me about some stuff, and I'd be like, you're right. Like that was crazy. Like I was like, and you hear these crazy stories back then about Steve Jobs or other crazy leaders, and I would kind of catch myself being one of those people. And because there's HR, I never really had any issues in that situation, but because I would sit in some of these things and learn about like HR meetings, and I had a good relationship with most of our HR executives, and just talking about stuff and being like, yeah, I should work on that. And kind of that's when I think the biggest, to answer your question, I would have like moments of like highly passionate moments. And I feel like you kind of got to figure out how to lasso those and kind of control them. And maybe even like, if it's possible, break them up into little pieces and distribute them more like a 4-square meal or 5-square meal or whatever that might be, because one gigantic plate of emotion is like, make you get a little full on that. But like, how could you break that up into small meals throughout the day so your body mass stays leaner and so on? Otherwise you end up with like a fucking pot belly of emotion. So to me, it's like, okay, take all that crazy passion and emotion and things like that, and how do you sort of like channel that and distribute it equally within your organization? And so I just realized that was probably one of my biggest flaws, is that, and I had a few times where I get called out. I had a great colleague, and my wife. I mean, I never want to, who would become my future wife, my wife. She's always been someone who's fortunately and unfortunately, but really calls me out, really keeps me honest. I've been very grateful, and I'm very blessed to have her in my life, because she would always sort of be that sort of balance of like, well, and we'll get into this. I worked with her. She was very involved with my professional life. So it's kind of embarrassing, but we get home and she'd be like, do you know what you said in that meeting? Or did you kind of like see that? And I'm like, fuck, did that happen? Like, I was just so caught up in the moment. It was insane. And, that probably is I have two probably major business flaws or leadership flaws, which is highly emotional, both most often, like you say, you get so far out into the 10-year vision that you're like, people are like, what the hell? Like, I'm talking about collabs with like Apple and, whatever it might be. It's just so insane. And that gets, I'm passionate about it. And people are like, yo, dude, we just got to get this board graphic done. Like, what the hell is happening right now? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, aren't we going to like, this board's going to fly to the moon, isn't it? And people are like, yo, this shit's got to be done in like 30 minutes. So I have that. which is a a pretty big flaw. And then I would say that I'm pretty impatient. I'm pretty impatient. So like and the fact that it sucks for a lot of other people, but back to like understanding programs and how things work. A lot of times people can be like, "Well, I need some time. It's gonna render for like 45 hours, and then we got to do this." And I'm like, "No, it's not, dude. Like I know how Premiere works. Like just let's go buy you a faster computer.
Yeah.
Like let's Illustrator create outlines. Like if you create outlines, it's gonna do that." And then they're like, "Oh shit." Just scoot over. Let me get in there and just like fucking do this graphic on my own. And that's bad, right? Like I don't empower people. I didn't empower people enough, which is, that's a flaw.
Dude, it's hard. Like I'm laughing at the things you're saying because I relate to it. Spencer came up with this idea called like Turning Point, of like this way we're gonna focus on punk people and how they started their own businesses. And great idea. And I'm sorry, Spencer. I've taken this thing and I'm like
He's taking your idea and running with it.
the worst.
You just got to
man.
give him credit.
I'm
As
the
long as you give him
worst.
credit.
This thing is turned into like a magic banana that's gonna fly us to Mars. Like I have like I can't, I just, well, not that I can't. I struggle with what you just said. It's like, I love, what if we did this?
Yeah.
And if I go back to playing in bands, it's like, oh, that's a cool riff. A great feedback I got from a guy is like, stop saying but, start saying and. Because he'd be like, you'd always say, that's a great idea, but what if we did this? And it dismisses my idea instead of saying, what if we did this and it brings my idea with
That's
us.
right.
And my thinking was always like, oh, the song could be this, and this is where your idea will fit into that. But he always felt that I was saying but. And in this case, I actually kind of was saying but. I maybe was dismissing the idea, but it was great feedback. Spencer, I'm sorry that I've taken your idea. I'm trying to fly to the moon on a magic banana with it. I as you were saying that, I'm just dying laughing.
Yeah.
The other thing is like, yeah, man, like you get stuck in these things where it's like, I just want to do it for you.
Yeah.
But you'd said that's not good leadership.
No.
How come?
Well, there's a lot of reasons as to why. The first reason is personal independence and freedom. So to me now, where I am in my own life, is that the more you don't let people do things for you, the less opportunity you have to enjoy your life.
Yeah.
And so for me now, there's a couple reasons why, a lot of reasons as to why, but my number one reason, which is very selfish, of why I want to empower people, it begins with empowering my own life. And so the most important thing in life is to live it. Right? There's a concept.
Yeah.
So how can you live your life if you're trying to live everyone else's life for them? Because their life is to do that board. Let them do it. Why? It gives you life. Because the second you sit down and grab the mouse and do it for them, or find yourself in a meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and you do all these things, the more you aren't able to grow with your whole life. And so I think that's a huge problem, because these executives are like, dude, I'm trying so hard to learn this because it's gnarly. But if I can empower everyone around me, and everyone around me can, like, I've always said this, and I've actually never pushed back on this particular concept, which is always make sure the people you hire are smarter than you, and make sure you give them all the credit and all that stuff. I've been pretty good about that. Like I've never not wanted everyone around me to be smarter than, I always want them smarter than me. In fact, I always think I'm the dumbest guy in the room. I'm pretty sure I am still. But empower those people so you can have a life, because nothing's more important than your family, your children, your health, your mental health, and even your sharpness at work. And how can you sharpen your own self if you're constantly doing other shit? So that's one, which is the selfish one. The number two, which is critical, is if you want to surround yourself with people smarter than you, you have to let them become smart. So you have to empower them to learn, and you have to be prepared to accept those mistakes. I have a thing that I call it the 80%. I made this up. But to me, it's hard to believe I've gotten to this point in my life, but as long as it's at 80, I'm going to let it slide. And I used to have to be 101% was how everything had to be, like some Steve Jobs type shit.
Yeah.
And I've learned that it isn't just about my business. It's about my employees' lives, my life, my children's life, the industry. And at 80%, if something is delivered to me. And even though I'm like, I mean, I won't say, actually, sometimes I'll say, okay, it's over 80. And I'll just say, let it go. Let it go. Let it be, let it live. Let it live in the world, the graphic, the people, the initiative, the skater. Like did it hit 80? And I've got this weird 80 thing going. And so I let the 20% slide because the 20% equals they get to grow because they got to let it go. Because if I get it to 101%, I actually took over the last 20
Yeah.
because they got it to 80 and I'm like, it's 80, but I got to just scoot aside so I get it to 100.
Yeah.
And they're like, fuck, bro. It's like, I think it's 100. I'm like, it's not. I'm the guy.
Yeah.
And so I'd be like, get over here. I'm going to get that 21% in there so it's perfect. And that person's like, fuck, bro. I can't even, and they don't get credit for the job. Cause then I'm like, I did that.
Yes.
Cause I'm like like back then, especially, I'm like this egomaniac.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, actually, I did that. I did that.
There's the
That's
voice.
my idea. Actually, because a person's in the meeting like, fuck, I did that, right? And then I'm like, actually, I did that because I did the fucking 21%. And that's really bad leadership. And by the way, I did that a lot back in the day. And that doesn't give your employees any confidence. And also, that's not cool. Like as a human, like let them live. And so I don't know, 80%.
Dude, I love it. I relate to it. I'm going to start applying that more in my life because I got to say what you said about also just like focusing, not taking over on a project and letting other people actually do it. Even if, let's say, they get to 80%, the biggest gain is you get to just enjoy your own life more.
That's right.
And that like weird perfectionism where it's like, no, it actually has to have that extra 21%. Nobody in the world's going to notice except for like you.
That's right.
You know, or like maybe someone on your level. And that on your level maybe isn't even a good thing that's necessary for the market. Right.
That's right.
That having that more space to like enjoy your life, have that extra 30 minutes or 2 hours with your kid or with your wife, or go on a walk or have some food, go on a run. Like, yo, that stuff matters. And poor leaders are made of being obsessive where you don't actually enjoy your life. Like the worst leaders I know are people who all they do is their business and they just don't, they're not plugged into life. I shouldn't say the worst. Many of the worst leaders I know are in that space because I have met some that are wonderful. Okay, let's move into your transition from Element. Because that's huge. That's a huge part of your story. So maybe give us a little background of like what led up to it. And then we'll hit into where you are now and what you're working on these days.
Yeah. Well, first off, I love this conversation. I just got to say that. Like, I love talking about these things, and everything you're saying is quite enlightening too, by the way. I find so much interest talking to other entrepreneurs and people's perspective on business. It's quite fun. I was saying that during the break. Like, I just really, it feeds my fire, right? Because like I think this goes back to like your role in life and what you're meant to do. And I think it's really important these type of conversations take place because there's not a lot of business people out there taking that 21% of time, and instead of fine-tuning a graphic, you're fine-tuning other people's opportunities to like learn from your shit, right? Because like what we just said, if anyone out there is listening and you let that go, man, you're gonna make a lot of motherfuckers happy. Totally, like seriously, the amount of lives you will change. You could go and start a nonprofit and try to feed the whole world, and you might have more success giving 21% back to your staff. And where that could go, and the amount of businesses and generations of lives that could change because of that one decision to empower people, right? So what was the question?
Lead up to you making the decision to move on to different things.
Man, it was a crazy, like, the biggest thing with the Element, and we're not, it doesn't matter. And we don't need to get into all the other like nuances of other businesses that were created either prior Element or because of Element. Because one thing about Element and skateboarding in general, and there's a lot of people out there that were, again, this is like blessed for this to happen, is that, and I'll use like Deluxe, which is a skateboard distribution company up in Northern California. And it's run by an individual by Jim Thiebaud, who's an amazing human. But what's really rad about skateboarding and other cultures, I think music industry is a lot like this. You're like, how are we going to make this? No one does this. And you're like, oh, I guess we're going to have to build our own plant. Because nobody makes skateboard wheels. Like, I guess we're going to have to make your thing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So what skateboarding has, it's really cool, is there are a lot of skaters and entrepreneurs out there have side hustles because they had to do it
Mhm.
because no one knew how to make a skateboard. No one knew how to pour a wheel or make a skateboard truck or make a skateboard magazine. And, we had a company that we started called 411 and 411 Video Magazine, and no one made skateboard video magazines. So we had to like create a duplication house to make duplications of skateboard videos. And then we had to hire filmers. And all of a sudden filmers were like an actual skateboard occupation. And people are like, what do you do for a living? I'm a skateboard filmer. And you're like, what? That's a job? You're like, it is because of 411. And, so to me, that is where I'm going with this is that you end up with like all this stuff, right? Just so much stuff and I don't know about other industries as well, but I can speak on behalf of myself and a lot of other founders of skateboarding, action sports industries. You end up with a lot of stuff and you kind of think it's a good thing as like, I guess in your early life, you're like, oh, I'm the successful entrepreneur with all these great businesses and people, and you're doing all these other things. And if you're in the industry, like, I now use Deluxe. That's why I brought up Deluxe, because, at Deluxe, there's like a whole bunch of other brands and they make wheels and there's trucks and they're part of a bigger movement within skate. And if you're part of the DNA, you know that. Well, that was me.
Mhm.
So I had all this stuff. And I kind of was like, it's a lot. This is a lot of stuff. Like, do I need all this stuff? Like, I don't know if I want all this responsibility and all this pressure. And it had just been a long time. I was tired. And the other part was, and I it's deep. I was really tired of corporate leadership. So tired of the big machine. And it's funny because it's taken a long time to heal from leaving Element and a lot of those businesses behind and selling them or whatever may have happened, quitting, selling, going out of business. Element was publicly traded, then it got taken private and bought by private equity. The whole group, not just Element, our whole group. And so having ridden that corporate world of like flying to board meetings and getting on stage and doing PowerPoints and then like getting back in the street and being a skater and trying to like make sense of that with like a team rider. And you're like, oh man, like little do they know. And like, do I even want to bother them with this stuff? It's so intense. And then going back into the corporate environment and trying to defend the team or the reason why we do this. And something that happened that was like a really big moment for me. And I've actually never told the story out loud. So I may actually edit it out.
Yeah, whatever
But
you want.
I'm
man.
going to tell the story and we'll see where it goes. We at Element were all about making organic product. Like we were really making some headway with like my whole vision for a long time was like, I want to be the Patagonia of action sports. That was like the product mission. There was a philanthropic mission with helping kids and skate camps and a lot of other things. But the product mission was like, how do we get to become Patagonia? And when an Element had started way back when, that was like, doing organic teas and recycled bottles, none of that stuff, even that technology didn't even exist. So at the beginning of Element, it was like putting really important messages on the product. Like, how do you, my thing with Element was always like, actually, my thing with everything I was pretty much involved with is it can't just be ink on a tee. I'm so tired of like, what does that mean to you? Like, why did you buy that? Like, it has to say something. Like, your kid can't just walk around, and I don't want to be too gnarly, but like, yo, kid, what is that? What does that mean? Does it say something? Do you know what that means? Do you know? So with Element, the whole Patagonia of action sports, that was like my whole idea is like, how could this company be totally organic? Like totally everything we do just changes the world for the better. all the way from like ecologically, sustainably to socially, environmentally, etc. So that was like the whole thing. And there was a time when I said inside the company, 51%, 51% of our product needs to be in some way, let's get there. So we can at least say the majority. That should be the magic word here. The majority of our company needs to be organic, sustainable, some way, shape, or form better, right? And I was constantly chasing, or we were constantly chasing this 51%. And I would sit in meetings and be like, are we at 51%? And there'd be the times where it'd be like, well, if you include this and that, it sends it over. I'm like, hey, let's just try to get there. Like, let's make it better. Make it better. Like, can it be 20% organic cotton? Or, how do we get there? And there's things like wheels that are toxic. And, there's certain things it's really difficult to get around, and you kind of got to check yourself. And there's so many ways you can do that wrong. But that became my thing. And there was a time when like we were very comfortably saying 51%. Like, wow, like we are at 51% between all these little things we're doing, because Element had a very large footprint on printables. And the fact that we were getting most of our tees at the time were starting to become organic t-shirts. We had like big printables business, and those t-shirts were being distributed into PacSun and Tilly's and all over the flipping world. And to think that this is like the bread and butter of our company and the vast majority of it is organic, that's a good feeling. And to get those, like where all of a sudden your t-shirts are the breadwinner of your business and it's organic, that's exciting. So that was really like something that was driving me in my mind with Element. And then a moment took place, which is where I'm going with the story, is that it was really silly. Like I said, hey, and this is pre-Stance, I think. But either way, it was like, hey, we had a really good sock business. And I said to myself, it could be really easy to do 100% of our socks organic. Like, does anyone even care about the sock business? Like, what kind of money does socks even bring in? And it was just like nothing, right? Like nothing. Like we'd be stoked. We sold 20 socks. Like it's not even a business here. Like I don't know. And again, we saw some traction with the socks thing, which is why it kind of like popped up on my radar. But it was like, hey, this is sort of like beer. I call it beer money. Right. I don't even drink, but that was like the thing. It's beer money, right? Like if we have no sock business, or if we had a huge sock business, this is just like a perk. And everyone agreed. So I was like, well, let's do all organic socks. Like that's an easy one. We could literally right now today, is it true? Like, can we do 100% of our sock business be organic? Even if the sock costs $1,000 or $5, source an organic sock. So we end up making 100% of our socks become organic. And we come up with a tagline, which I definitely do not think I thought of this. I think I probably read it somewhere, but it was like, leave no footprints, 100%.
Come on, that's good. That's gold, right?
Yeah, or leave no footprints. I think they're like it's on signs all over national parks and shit. Right. But leave no footprints, Element organic socks. Right. So we're all excited. We have 100% of our socks are organic. You're doing a catalog. You're able to claim it. You've got like cool copy of why they're organic, and you're like, oh man, we're making some traction. This is really some positive stuff. And also, you're setting a tone for like what might be able to happen to other product in the future because we use this as our example. And are people buying it? Do they believe in this whole concept? Like, let's just use this as like a little test. And it's socks, no big deal, right? Everybody's agreed. Everybody agrees. So our sock business really picks up. It starts doing quite well. And I'm like, wow, this whole sock thing is like organic socks at Element. Like, this is great. So what happened that really pivoted my entire perspective of business and private equity and corporate environments and public company and paying attention to the numbers and all that was that here was this category that was completely off the reservation. And we were growing it from pretty much nothing. And so then all of a sudden it got on the radar. And people are like, oh, what's that sock business over there? And you're like, oh, that's this whole thing. We're kind of killing it on socks. And so they were like, oh, we should try to grow that. You're like, I agree. We're doing it now. But sure, like that's always, there's the money more quarterback. You're like, no shit. We've been like focusing on this for like 2 years. We got it to 100% organic socks and it's growing. That was the point. right? That's why we did it. It's got a 2-page spread now in our catalogs. It used to be like the size of a fucking postage stamp and nobody cared about it. Now it's covering some real estate. It's becoming a business. So what went down was we were trying to source like, grow the category and like introduce some more colors and like just do it, like have a proper assortment because it's a growing business. So what ended up happening was that someone at the time, and it's not important who it is, wanted to get a particular color of the sock or price point. I can't remember. Color, price point, doesn't matter. And by putting this one sock, which would actually be two, it's a set. So that's an argument, right? Like, is that a sock a two or what? How does that work? This set of socks in the line, they had somehow sourced a sock and they got it to the price point they wanted. And they were like, oh man, if we get this sock in this particular color at this particular price point, we're going to sell fucking thousands of these things. I was like, oh, sick. Is it organic? They're like, mm-mm. I'm like, well, dude, we can't make it. Like the whole business is hanging on this concept. And it's a big win for the company. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I either, again, because it's so long ago, I don't know if I agreed because in my naivety and just wanting to please the machine, I let it slide or I kicked and screamed and like, I honestly don't remember. But more importantly, what happened is the sock squeezed into the line because it was so important to get that non-organic sock to grow the business that we were no longer able to say this entire campaign that said 100% of our sock line, like even in a sales meeting, you could be like, hey, buyer, all of our socks are organic. This is our angle. You had to be like, 99.999% of our socks are organic, except for this one that's like a nickel and it's pink. And they're like, huh? And that showed the ignorance of the machine. Yeah. And it just broke my heart. It literally just destroyed me because of how symbolic this moment was, because it really meant so many other things to me. Totally. And that I carried that with me for a really long time, like in my little bag of resentment, because I would see it happen throughout corporate world all the time. And I'd speak to other people. And back to what you said earlier, like at what point am I going to be part of the problem and complain or am I going to like just do my own shit? And Element, one thing you can't do, this is some like to the listeners out there, one thing I don't think you should do is if you have a big epiphany in your life and you have a company that's propped up and doing well and everybody's prospering from it. And you've got 25 years of DNA there and you have an idea. I think a big problem people do is they'll take that idea as a selfish leader and they plug it into the company and disrupt everything, right? Like all of a sudden, and you've heard these stories where like the CEO gets into like golf and all of a sudden they're like, hey, we're going to buy a golf company. And you're like, what? Why? Because we have a shitload of money and I love golf and I want to go play with fucking Tiger Woods. And you're like, all right, I guess we're buying a golf company because whatever said we are. And then you just get way off track and everybody's sidetracked. You're out of your, the DNA and what you're meant to be. So there was a piece of that happening where I'm like, what I want to do isn't what Element needs to do anymore. And Element is great. I love it. Like it's a beautiful brand. But at the same time, I can't be the person. I've sold it. I don't own it anymore. It's run by private equity. I've got stakes in the deal, but at the end of the day, it's not my business. You have to realize that seller's remorse. It's a real thing. And I was like, these things are happening. It's in the best interest of the shareholders. That's why you sell businesses. That's why private equity buys companies. You have to realize that. And I didn't realize that. Like, that's a new thing for me of like, wow, I made a lot of executives suffer in the board or in the private equity because I was thinking about it still like I was my money, back to like my money and my business. And it is a good idea, the things I wanted to do, but it's not necessarily what those guys, they bought it. They want to turn it into a rollerblade company. That's their prerogative. Like, I mean, I could fight, kick and scream and whine and do whatever I want and give them my opinion, but hey, they bought it. And that's a really big, gnarly, jagged pill to swallow But I swallowed it and I realized that I had to go do my own shit. And again, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus because I do think that those guys and those executives in all corporations, public company, private equity, you name it, it's their shit. And like you said, if you don't like it, go and do your own thing. So we just couldn't see eye to eye on those things. And I just kind of like came to terms with that. And I was just ready for change. And so it was just like a really aha moment of that sock story combined with a lot of other things. Um, and this is a bold statement, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but Element's kind of not a skateboard company anymore, right? Like that's cool in many ways. Like how I said I had that aha moment of a woman in a yoga class wearing an Element shirt. Well, it's that to the nth degree now, and it's fashion and it's clothing. I'm a skater forever.
Yeah.
I will be a skater till the day I die. I will literally be buried with a skateboard. Like I'll be cremated or buried with a skateboard. You guarantee it. And no matter what happens in my life, and no matter how many times people would try to call me out, I will. That's one thing. I might struggle claiming to be an artist or claiming to be an entrepreneur, but one thing I don't struggle with at all is that I am 100% skateboarder. And when my brand, or not my brand, is becoming a clothing brand, which again, that's cool. That's okay. Like I'm proud of that. Like we made high fashion, did shit and like on runway shows, and they're designing amazing stuff with amazing clothing designers, and people are wearing it everywhere. And it's like shit that back when I was into fashion, I'm proud of that. But that's not, I'm a skateboarder at the end of the day. And I don't want to be running a clothing brand. And they don't want a skater running a clothing brand because I'm just constantly going to be turning it back to, well, what does this have to do with skateboarding? What does this have to do with our original DNA? It's like a broken record player. Who wants to hear that shit all day? If I owned it, I'd be like, fire that motherfucker. Like, seriously, like, is he going to bring that skateboard shit up? We just paid X amount of dollars for that. I don't want to hear that shit. I didn't buy a skateboard company. I bought a skateboard company that's going to become a fucking massive clothing brand. Yeah. And if that's what it's going to be, that's not the game I'm playing.
Hell yeah. Well, dude, first of all, thank you for the vulnerability there. Cause you said a lot of stuff there, like things that can resonate, things that I could imagine maybe in my own future. Like there's a lot of cool stuff there. And for anyone who's just like, you started something cool, you started out of your garage, your apartment, whatever it is, some people, and for most people, that thing fizzles out. You do your next thing, you do your next thing, and maybe nothing pops for them. Right. For some people, something pops and you get attention and people care. And at some point, you got to let it go.
You do.
And that letting it go.
It's very hard.
Is super hard. It's really hard. And what you just shared, I think is really incredible. And I appreciate it. So let's, as we're heading towards the end of our conversation here, let's talk about what you're doing now. Let's talk about the Heart Supply.
Okay. Thank you. Well, with all that being said, it's funny. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do next. And it was weird because you kind of wonder like, okay, am I going to retire and sort of step away from all this and just be a skater and be a father? And, you know, you don't really know. And I think that's, you know, talk about HQP, high quality problems, right? You're like, what am I going to do? Like, that's crazy that you can, you know, I mean, I look at that every day and I'm like, I can't even believe this is an option to even ask that question to myself. Cause normally the answer would be go get a fucking job is what you're going to do. Right. So I was trying to figure out what we wanted to do, what I wanted to do with myself, and going back to like some mental health stuff. And my whole life struggled with like anxiety, depression, kind of like compulsive behavior because of all the things that I struggled with as a kid and had to deal with. So that didn't help also because when you have that departure, you're kind of like literally there's like, it's a death in your life. When you walk away from a company that you were part of for almost 30 years, people don't understand the loss. And I think that goes back to some things that upset me because, you know, there's not a lot of people that are compassionate to the founders that are dealing with that. And I think that's something, you know, if I were to give advice to private equity and publicly traded companies and boards of directors, that's very difficult for most of those people to relate to. You're talking about a person inside an organization that had a baby And like you kind of need to respect the parent. And again, like I make jokes about that earlier. Like, you know, you bought the company and you should be able to do what you want to do. But there's a level of compassion and there's a level of like, dude, this guy just like lost his kid or let you adopt his child. Like, you need to like respect that. And if I were to ever be in that position, well, I have been in that position, but to be in that position of owning a brand that you have other founders, you know, looking back on those things and giving advice to other people that are part of that is that you got to always remember that because you're going to get the best out of that founder if you keep that in mind through the process. And I think it's easy for people that come from a non-founder role to not ever understand the love you have for that child and the separation anxiety you get when you're away from it or there's meetings taking place about big things that, you know, your kids like going off to their first party alone and you're like, hold on, I'm not in that meeting about we're going to do a shoe division with the brand I started. You know, even though you should let go of that, it's still like the people that own the business now should be like, hey, we're talking about making shoes and expanding into like big wheels. Like we might want to bring Johnny or whomever in to explain the logic, right? So why I'm mentioning that is that I when I was going through all of that, I was really suffering from a lot of again, like throughout my life, but really suffering with like, what am I going to do? Like, this is my identity. Like, this is everything I am. My whole life I dedicated to this. I'm live and breathe Element and skateboarding and this team and, you know, all these individuals on the team. And even those guys don't fully understand, like, hey, is Johnny all right? Like, he just lost his kid, literally. And they're off, you know, they're going to ride for other brands and like do their own things. And to them, like Element might be a 5-year, 3-year, and in some cases longer for a lot of guys. But there's a situation, I'm not saying get out the world's smallest violin for me, but I'm just explaining like no one's quite understanding these people that have been close to you for all this time that like, dude, this is heavy. My wife understood, my children understood. And we were as a family, like, what are we going to do? So what I had noticed that had been a big chip on my shoulder for a long time in skate, and I just watched the Tony Hawk documentary Until the Wheels Fall Off, which actually is really hot on my mind right now, which is with Element and with skateboarding, what I really saw was no one was really catering to the brand new skater, the kid, or even the kid who hasn't skated yet. And I just kind of like, we did Element Twigs, which was a really good run with like miniature skateboards for little guys. And that's how we ended up getting like Nigel Houston and Tom Shar and really grooming some incredible skateboarders that went on to do amazing things. And that was a big moment for me because I was like, and back to Element, I talk about the sock thing. I remember sitting in a meeting and they're like, yeah, we really should just like kind of stop this whole Twigs thing. And I'm like, what? Like, that's how we got Nigel. Like Twigs, bro. Like he's the greatest skateboarder on the face of the earth because of a twig. You want to stop this? So like that, I was like, and that was fairly recent. I had this twig meeting and going back to like things I can talk about now that I'm not there. And again, this isn't throwing Element under the bus because they have moved on to wonderful things. But I sat in a meeting and the executive at the time sat with me and was like, hey, I'm really glad I got your ear for a minute. I really think we should stop this whole Twigs thing. And I just was like, that is the foundation of skateboarding. Like, are you kidding me? So that really kind of sat with me again, these type of things. And I'm like, I literally think Twigs is the future. Like beginning skateboarding is it. And what cool brand is really making that happen? Like, why isn't there a brand that's focusing on just kids who either just started skating or don't skate yet? How do we create a brand that has pros, has cool graphics, basically all the architecture of an amazing skateboard brand, but it's 100% focused on a kid, not cheesy, like a kid that like not a cheesy brand, a kid that really wants to get engaged with skateboarding, sees the beauty of skate culture, or they saw it on the Olympics. Their parents either used to skate. There's something drawing them to skate, but then they get there and they're like, hold on a minute. This is a whole bunch of grown ass men that like don't cater to me. And there's been some attempts like Twigs and some other brands that do things like that, but nothing where we're just like, hey, we do this and we're proud of it. Like, this is who we are. We talk to you. We bang our chests about being a beginner skateboard brand. We are proud of this moment. And our riders, our pros, like when we went and recruited these guys, we were like, we are doing this. You aren't going to hide from this. You're going to stand out and shout. We are here for entry-level beginner skaters because we want you to skate and love the skateboarding community, this thing that we all get so much joy from. And the thing that was so mind-boggling to me was like, you talk about skateboard brands and they're like, we do this, we make single decks, we're doing these cool ass graphics, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, and we make complete skateboards that are sold at Zoomies, but don't tell anyone. And by the way, it's 50% of our business. And then you're like, and the pros are like, yo, bro, we got to do a collab with this. And I got this single deck hanging up in this particular skate shop and it's dope and blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, hey, do you have a complete with your name on it? No, I would never want that. You know, and it's just like, it's funny because, you know, you think about that, it'd be like being an amazing rock band, right? The greatest band of all time, or not even like Black. Let's just say you're Black Flag and you're Henry Rollins and you're like, I don't want kids to listen to my music. Right? You're like, hold on a minute. What's the average age of a skater, right? They're young, dude. They're so young. They're like literally, and it's getting younger. So they're like 5 years old all the way to like, you know, whatever, 12. And like, no one's talking to these guys. Everybody's just like this gigantic fraternity of like, yo, we all drink. We're all over 21. We smoke shitloads of weed. We're in tour vans. And I'll even say like, hey, would you let your kid get in the tour van? Like, would you let your own child travel with your own team? They're like, fuck no. Like, are you kidding me? I'm like, but that's every skater, bro. Like every skater pretty much that's starting to skate is like 9.
Yeah.
And you won't, like, what does that tell you? So we were having a big thing in our family about this. Like, we were really upset about it because we were like, man, you can't, like, there's no one servicing this side of the market. It's totally amazing and positive. There's like, you go to a contest, there's parents involved, their kids are going, the kids are like, yo, dad, check out this trick. You know, like dad's at the park with the kid, he's skating it's generational now. And you got these like gritty skaters like, yo, dude, that kid's here with his dad. That shit's kind of whack. And like the kid's wearing a helmet and like, he's got a helmet with a mohawk on it. And his little brother's got a razor and they're all here with like a picnic basket and hanging out and having fun and being like a well functioning family. That shit is whack. Like this guy's got bad look for our park. And the dad's like coming over like, hey, do you mind not drinking that 6-pack of beer in this park filled with 6-year-olds? The guy's like, what the hell? He's coming in here trying to tell me how to do my shit. Like, this is our park. And you're like, bro, it was your park like 25 years ago. Guess whose park it is now?
Yeah.
The future.
Yeah.
Right? And so it just was driving me crazy. And then on top of that, and I don't want to throw my son under the bus here because it's kind of rough because he's part of a huge factor in this all, is at my son camp, he's a skater, and he's a damn good skater. And he started skating. We all started skating, all of us, our whole family. But he started skating when he was born. And he skated and he's grown into becoming a fascinating and incredibly creative, beautiful skateboarder. And I love him with all my heart. And when he first started really getting into it, I really started looking at skateboarding through a different lens because I was like, hold on a minute. I'm about to go on tour with the team with my son and I got to drive a separate van. Like I literally have to take a separate van with the Twigs kids because they can't be in the van with these other guys. I'm like, that's not right. Like we should all be able to ride together. Like that's just skateboarding, right? But you have to have like, and people talk about it all the time. You got the sober van, the party van, and like the, you know, you got to separate these guys. It's just how skateboarding works. And so I definitely started looking at it and I'm like, man, I was taking him to contests and really starting to look at skateboarding like through a different lens because of the fact that I'm going to brag for a minute. And that is our family and the Hard Supply is kind of lethal in the sense that we are like the real deal. Why? Because I'm an old ass crusty skater that grew up in the Supreme days of New York and Shut and Zoo York and like legit street skater, right? Then my wife is like full on skate mom. She is like skate mom top to bottom. She just is a woman who has a child who is deep engaged in skating, and she needs, as a great mom and wife, she is present for our skate life. Then I'm a skate dad. So I'm a dad that has a son that skates. I happen to skate. So I'm like cruising around and, like I want him to wear a helmet. I want it to be safe and our family's going. So we're like this skate family. And I'm a skateboarding entrepreneur that has lived and breathed the entire industry. So I'm like, when people are like, I don't know, man, he doesn't totally get it. I'm like, bro, do you have a kid that skates and also did, fucking Smith down Hollywood 16, kickflip the 12 at 12 years old? And rips like nobody's business and loves like Max Allure and Little Dre. Like I watch more skateboarding YouTube and TikTok and than any 50-year-old man on the planet, because of like, I love it and my kids skate. So the point of all this is that someone needed to step up and start a brand that was proud of this new emerging opportunity. And we wanted to do it because it's a great business model. And back to being, this whole point of being an entrepreneur, but also I love it and it needs it so bad. And so we were like, yeah, we're going to make completes. We're going to make them affordable, because there was this whole thing of like, no one's even like focusing on how do we make these boards affordable for these kids? Because skaters will say like, they're not proud of the complete market. So like, let's just say like Real Skateboards or Baker Skateboards, and these guys make a complete, as they should, but they're not necessarily really proud of it, or the core market's also not proud when they see a Baker complete board in a Tilly's window at the mall. It's sort of like, I didn't see that, like that's like not who we are as a brand. Maybe it's not, but the boards are also really expensive because that's not what they're focused on. That's not their priority, and it shouldn't be, because that's not who their brand is catering to. But we were like, okay, we have to make this board affordable. We want to get a lot of kids on it. We don't want to turn parents away. Like $125 skateboard is just a lot to ask. And so they end up in Target looking for a board. And that's when skate community gets all upset, because then the kids ends up in like Walmart or Target and they're like, hey, he's on a Walmart board. You're like, well, what else is he supposed to be on, guy? Like, you should be happy that he's getting involved with skateboarding. What's your problem? He bought that board from Walmart. Walmart's carrying brands that are whack. And then you're like, okay, well then let's get some skaters in there and start a Walmart brand. No, that's whack too. Okay, well, do you have a solution? So you're going to go buy a $40, $50 complete at Core Ass Skate Shop? No, that's whack too. We can't have the core. You're just like, dude, what do you want us to do? Do you want more kids to skate so pros can get paid? Yeah, pros are getting totally underpaid. Well, let's get more kids on skateboards. That'll pay them. All right, that's a great idea. Well, then we need more beginner brands. We need more kids on boards from Walmart. We actually need more kids on scooters too, by the way, because then once they get sick of the scooter, they just hop on a skateboard. Why? Because they've got a whole life at the skate park. They got friends at the skate park. They've spent the last 5 years at the skate park on a scooter, and all they want to do is become a skater. And they finally become a skater, and it's a scooter that got them there. So don't hate on the scooters either. Like, embrace it. And if they stay on a scooter, cool, because now your kid's got a friend. Isn't that cool? Like, what is up with everybody? Right. So I get super upset about it because the whole industry is just not ready to like grow together. Right. Just like the car industry, everybody should just be like, okay, this is skateboarding. It's in the Olympics. This is this side. This is that side. And like, I've asked questions out to the core market. I've even said things like, what do you think about, I don't know, like I'm not going to mention a name, but this potentially popular skater. What if they just had a pro model in Walmart or whatever? Like, isn't that okay? Like, don't you want a little kid that's 6 years old that's never seen a skateboard in his life get a $50 skateboard with this guy's name on it? Then he'll get the $125 one. I compare it to like BMW. He gets a 3 Series, a 5 Series, and a 7 Series. Once he gets a 7 Series, that means he's riding a crooked board with indies and spits, and like he's making Zoomies money, he's making Baker money, crooked money. Don't we all want that? And the pro finally gets paid, the pro that's like starving with no health insurance and he's broken his fucking back his whole life. And nobody's like, everybody, anytime I say it's like, it's a bad word to get rich in skateboarding. Like, what's wrong? What's up with that? Like, you can't be rich in skating without being in trouble. But then everybody loves Tony Hawk now because he managed to like get through that. And everyone's like, oh, I was like his friend all the way through. Like, he's Tony Hawk. He's the shit. And you're like, bro, I heard those conversations. Like, you're friends with him now, but you didn't support him through the process. I mean, Dwayne Peters said it all day long in that Tony Hawk interview. He totally fesses up to it. I give the guy mad props. So I know I'm going on, but it's a heated thing for me because our mission, when back to the original question about the heart supply, is that our mission was, I'm sick of this. Like, I'm just not looking back. Like, I'm going to be proud of this. Our riders are going to be proud of this. My son's going to be proud of it. We want to create a legacy. We want to get more kids on skateboards. I want to be in Target. I want to be distributed all over the world through all sorts of crazy, awesome distribution channels to include Core all the way to Target. I want to bring it all together. I don't see the problem. Like, an iPhone sold everywhere. You go to Verizon, you go to flipping Target, you go anywhere, you can buy a flipping iPhone. I don't see anybody having a problem with that. They're still wildly happy to hold up their iPhone and aren't worried about the Core. And then I think of this too, sorry, but it just keeps on going. Like, the irony that people are like, that's not cool, but I'll take that check from Nike and Adidas. And you can buy those shoes anywhere on the earth. You walk through any mall and anybody's wearing them. And then they're like, okay with that, but then they're not okay with this other, the contradictions within this sort of concept are outrageous. And people just need to step back and just say, are they skating and having fun? That's it. Like, Andy Anderson is a skateboarder that wears a helmet, and he does all these incredibly wild tricks, and he's always happy. And I don't know Andy personally. And I'm going to do shout outs. Like, there's a skateboard company called Braille and Revive. And these are skateboard brands that exist and skateboarders that exist, Jagger Eaton, that catch so much shit for basically not caring. And isn't that what skateboarding was built on? And now all of a sudden it's become something where like it's so judgmental and so like everybody's like, oh, he's wearing a helmet. Oh, he does this. He skates this way. His parents showed up. And all these things which are like, dude, these are all the things that we like fought our whole lives to get to finally. And we are punk rock. Well, now the new punk rock is Andy Anderson. The new punk rock is Braille. The new punk rock is Heart Supply, because we're ones going against the grain and trying to do things a little differently and getting all that pushback that skaters used to get. Because now if you're a skater and you support a lot of these like kind of sort of cool brand, I mean, look at Supreme. Like, that's easy. I mean, I love Supreme, but like, you're accepted. That's cool. Like, it's cool as shit. It's not cool to be, Andy Anderson in a lot of ways. That guy has to put up with a lot of shit, or he had to. He had to earn his stripes so hard. The same way a core ass skater back in the day had to earn their stripes, like the Beastie Boys or the Jungle Brothers or Tribe Called Quest or Nadas Kappas and Mark Gonzalez and all these guys. They had to earn their stripes so hard. And now it's really easy just to be cool and be like a trendy ass cool skater, rocking dope ass clothes, and all the girls are into you and boys are into you and vice versa. But to be the new brands that are pushing against the grain and changing, it's more punk rock to be an Olympian skater than it is to be a cool guy core skater that's part of like that underground movement right now, because that's very cool and accepted. But to be in the Olympics and be Nigel Houston or Jagger Eaton or Himana Reynolds and be proud to get a medal and be proud to represent making some money and making power moves in a career, that is the new core, in my opinion. To be a kid at a skate park with a helmet and a mohawk on it with your parents and your best friend's a scooter, that's punk rock. To go there, I saw a guy the other day rollerblading at a skate park, and he was so stoked. He had like his headphones on and he's like rollerblading through the park. And I'm like, now that's punk rock. That dude has so much balls. Like, the fact that he came in here doesn't give a rat. And he's got all these skaters like drinking their six pack. Like, what's up with that dude? Like, somebody go get this dude out of our park. And you're like, bro, that dude's punk rock. Like, that is gnarly. That's like skating in the 80s. Holy shit. That's the most skate thing I've seen all day, is the dude on the rollerblades that had the balls to come in here and skate. Now that's skate. The scooter kid that shows up at a core ass park in the hood and all the skaters are there smoking weed and have a six pack, and the dude rolls up with his mom and his fucking scooter. I'm like, now that's a skater.
Oh yeah, man. I'm laughing only when I was a kid. We were out skating downtown Calgary, and there were these rollerbladers, and we were just like doing what you're doing. Just like, God, this is like
Yeah.
our spot. What are these clowns like? And of course, they were like older than us. They were like physically fit dudes who were like, yeah, those guys. Like, we're not saying anything to them. And one dude comes up, friendliest dude, big smile on his face. He's like, hey man, would you mind if I try your skateboard? And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And he crushed it.
Yeah.
He was just like, whatever the tricks are at the time, this dude was doing it. And I was like, and I literally said, why are you roller skating? He's like, well, why can't I do both?
Right.
And I was a little kid at the time. Well, I mean, I was a teenager, and I was floored. But of course, I was a kid, so like we laughed. We're like, oh, what a poser. But it's like, no. And I think about that guy once in a while, and your story was making me think about it. It was like, oh, that was just a happy person.
Yeah.
Like, that was a happy person who's probably a good athlete who could enjoy a lot of things, where I was an unhappy person, and I found refuge in a scene, which is super cool and it was very helpful to me in many ways. But clinging to the rules of that scene and wanting to put those rules on everyone else was part of what I thought gave me stability, but it's actually fed into unhappiness. All right. So as we're closing off, where can people find the Heart Supply?
Well, sorry, I have to regress. I just have to regress.
Yes.
I cannot help myself. If you today, this has been my little obsession lately, and you, because skateboarding is all about like relevance, right? Like it's be here now, and it's like this ever evolving like at once moment. Like that's skateboarding. Like you do a kickflip in that moment of like nothingness, right? Like that's skating. Like that when you're bombing a hill and there's nothing else around you, because if you think even anything else but bombing the hill, you're toast.
Yeah.
Same thing with the kickflip, all that stuff. It's like be here now is skateboarding, right? That's skateboarding. It's not then and it's not here. It's here, right? So when I think of skateboarding, and this is like my rule of thumb, and this goes back to the Heart Supply and why did I start the Heart Supply? If you're any human being and you close your eyes and you think of a skate park, because that's like today, that would be the now of skateboarding. And you think of a skate park where everybody goes typically to skate, and you close your eyes and you're like, okay, do me a favor and describe what you see. I don't care if you're from the 80s or like whoever, like what is reality? Like describe to me what you see. They would say, I see a family with the dad and a kid and a scooter, and I see kids with helmets, and I see pads, and I see all, like you would describe something that is real. Like it's not what you're talking about in a board meeting. It's not what you're talking about like a bunch of core guys all bitter about what the hell, how much it's changed. Because it's like music. Like that's what it was, but it's not Elvis Presley anymore. Like when you close your eyes, what do you see? Like what is it? And when you go there, is it consistent with what you closed your eyes and saw? And that is reality of business. You can definitely look for the future. I think you should, but you also have to come to terms with like what it is now. It's in the Olympics. It does have scooters. It does have rollerbladers. It does have parents. It is going down this path, and you can either embrace it and grow with it and start a brand that speaks to that proudly, or you can be a poser and capitalize on it quietly and not admit it, or you can just get the hell away from it. But that to me really is the truth of like what we're trying to do, and do it in a positive manner and get as many skateboards under kids' feet as possible. So where you can find the Heart Supply is everywhere, which is why I'm so excited. We are, and I got to think, there's people out there like Eastern Skate Supply, Skate Warehouse, a lot of Centrano, a lot of really cool distributors and people that have really supported the concept, which I'm so grateful for. And so you can get it at lots of skate shops around the world, along with Target, which is like probably for me one of the coolest sort of aha moments of my life. And I'm so proud of the fact that we are distributed into mass market. I'm proud of it on so many levels. It's just mind-boggling to have been able to pull that off. So you can find it in mass market, especially at Target, and you can definitely find it in the core market also. And if you can't, you should definitely ask for it, because we want to spread the message that I'm talking about. And because we're not trying to compete with those guys, we're trying to help elevate the industry. Yeah.
Hell yeah. All right, man. So as we're closing off, I've got one more question for you, and then I want to give you a space for any final words that you have, anything you want to plug, anything you want to bring into the conversation. So I'm going to start, or I'm going to end with the first question that I asked you. So who are you and what do you do?
That's really interesting, huh? That's good. That's clever. Wow. I bet this is the same reaction a lot of people have, right? Damn, that's good. I'm an artist. That's good, man. That's really psychological, right? There's your therapist background coming in hot. Yeah, I'm definitely an artist. I am definitely a father and a husband, and a parent. I'm an entrepreneur for sure. I'm a storyteller. That's for sure. And you know what's rad is I'm happy.
Yeah.
I'm super stoked. I really am. I'm so happy. You know, it's just that's probably, yeah. Oh, and I said earlier I'm a deep thinker, and you just now you catch why. And even that question, I have to think about it. I think because I know this is recorded, I always think about those things, and I'm like, I want to look back on that and be proud, right? So I think the most important thing that I am is I am a parent and a husband. Like that to me is like the ultimate like purpose in my life, is that I have two amazing little humans that I'm responsible for, and I have a beautiful wife, and both inside and out, and that we are like literally like a family unit. And I wish there was a word. Is there a word that's a parent and a husband? What is that called? They need to come up with a word for that. Why doesn't that exist? That's a problem. That's probably why there's so many fucking divorces in the world, right? Because they haven't come up with a word that keeps it all together.
That's right.
So no, that's for sure.
All right, man. So finally, anything you want to add before we close off?
Yes, I was thinking about it a little bit in the back of my head. So the project that I'm most proud of, because I mentioned Target, I'm really excited about being in Target. I'm really excited about getting skateboards to the masses, and also what that fiscally does for the health of our team riders' pocketbooks and the brand itself. And it's just amazing how that type of distribution can support skaters as they should be supported, which is something that's very, very important. But what I'm most proud of as far as initiatives that we have done with the Heart Supply is a project in Mexico called Chala. And Chala, it was something that was really awesome at Element, that also is, you know, not to keep digging into Element, because I'm not. It's just part of the things that, as an evolving brand, that change, is that we had Element Skate Camp. We had many camps, but we had one in particular called Element Skate Camp in Visalia National Forest. And it's beautiful, Sequoia National Forest. And with the Heart Supply, one of the, you know, sort of the things that left me kind of a little upset about when I left Element is that was Element had lost that camp, and also it was something that my son's name is Camp, kind of giving you how important that is to me. And so when Heart Supply had started, it was like, how do we recreate something that's special for ourselves as a company, because of, like, you know, live and learn, and what makes your company special and gives your team riders, and how do you make change, and all these things that are so important to me with respect to change and purpose, and not just a job, and not just being in Target, and like I had mentioned earlier, the fiscal benefits of that. But then how do you identify how you're making positive change? So immediately when Heart Supply had started, that was like almost more important than building a business. It was like, how do we make a difference? So we ended up connecting, I met an incredible individual by the name of Ricardo Santa Cruz, who was in the process of developing a property in Mexico called Chala, the town of Chala. And we ended up really hitting it off. And he's an amazing philanthropic human who has developed some incredible properties. And so when we started connecting and I started learning more about what was going on the property and the towns nearby and the surrounding area and so on, it was really clear that there might be an opportunity for us to do something together. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting that always kind of bothered me with skateboarding was that Mexico is so close by and we service skateboarding around the world very well. But Mexico seems to be, it needs help in the skateboard community. It needs us here in the US, we do actually kind of like define skate culture, or we have for many years, and that's changing quite a bit now. But like, how can we get involved and do more things? I mean, skateboards are manufactured over there. Lots of them are. So we started talking, Ricardo and I, and the whole idea was like, hey, we should build a skate park on the property of Chala, and we should build the Heart Park. And we can give back and be involved with the community and do some talent searching and find great skateboarders over there, and then start doing some like cross-pollination where skaters from the Heart Supply and in general in the community from all around the world could go into Mexico in the town of Chala that we're developing, which is right outside of Puerto Vallarta, and we could start visiting there and skating there more frequently. And not that this wasn't already happening, because skaters do go in there and there's a pretty thriving skate community. But Ricardo's vision was building a town that embraced the community and helped, where this property, it's when you go to these resorts, typically, you go inside and you're in there and there's a giant wall and you're actually not really experiencing the culture of where you are. And you're not really experiencing the culture with the locals, etc. So this whole idea was like, no, that's the opposite. We're going to bring in and invite open door policy to all the local people to include visitors and so on, and build a community where everyone that works there and that's part of it's like 360 degrees of tourists that are visiting to come and surf and skate and do all these different things, along with interacting with the local community with agriculture and stores, and even like a little like a hospital that's schooling, a creative center, so on. And this is on 3,000 acres on the coast of Mexico, and it's absolutely tropical and gorgeous. And this guy Ricardo has just got a heart of gold. And so when we started talking and I'm hearing all this, and there's like, I mean, it is insane. There's like a turtle sanctuary on the beach, and there's a soccer field, and again there's mango fields, like acres and hundreds of acres of mango fields, and just gorgeous. So his first priority, once we start talking, he's like, let's build the park, and let's build it now. So we built this skate park that's already finished and ready to roll, and kids are there skating as we speak. And it's on this 3,000 acres along the coast, and they're building houses and boutique hotels and so on. And it's going to be an absolutely phenomenal, top-notch property. But in the same breath, we have school buses that are going out and picking up local kids and bringing them in to skate. And we're teaching lessons, and we're doing board drops and getting really involved with the local community. And the fact that we're able to see that change, like there's a lot of times you're involved and you don't quite know what you're really doing when you donate money or you have like a function and a nonprofit. You don't really know exactly the change that's going down. So we're going in and doing this physically and seeing the boards being given and teaching these kids like ourselves and interacting and skating with the community, and then also bringing in the local heroes, the sponsored kids, and giving them boards and giving it more attention. And all this is happening on this particular property. And that has been probably my proudest moment with the Heart Supply. In addition to that, because of our luxury of moving a quantity of completes through our distribution channels and having a level of success pretty quickly with the brand, which we're very proud of, is that thus far, we have given away more than 2,000 skateboard completes to kids in need around the world.
Hell yeah.
So already with the Heart Supply, we've done more philanthropic stuff with our brand, I kind of feel like that I've done in my whole career combined in such a short period of time with that level of freedom, independence. And I think keeping it pure skate, like without all the noise around me, and just being like, why am I doing this? Yeah. So that's like sort of my plug of like what I'm most proud of with the Heart Supply, for sure.
Hell yeah, man. Awesome. Well, listen, this has been an amazing conversation. We did 2.5 hours. Literally flew by, man. It felt
Cool.
like 5 minutes. This was super
Cool.
cool. Thank you so
I
much.
thought
for
we were
your
going to
time.
do like 2 on the money. When you said 2, I heard you say it earlier. I was like, I know I'm definitely going to go 2.
2 and change.
2 and change. I did a 9 club and it was like 2 and change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, man, you killed it. Thank you so much. You have anything you want to say before we pop off?
Hey, you know, I think the most important thing, you know, this is about leadership, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we're really talking about here. I think the first thing about being a leader is you got to understand yourself. And being a leader is about being as good inside as you are outside. Like, you can't lead until you yourself are a leader of yourself. And so you have to like take the time. If you are listening to this and your goal is to be a leader, you need to spend as much time on yourself as you do your business, because I didn't do that. And it really fucks me up that I think about like all those years that I spent thinking I was becoming more successful, but I was actually regressing as an individual, which made me a worse leader. So the more you start understanding people's personalities and what's important in life, and respecting people's families and the people that work for you and your goals, but most importantly, the more you spend time improving and building your personal awareness, and that is how you become a great leader. Because when you fix yourself and then you walk in that office and you understand what it's like to be a healthy person, because you too are leading by example, because you are the healthy person, then how you lead is healthy. And I don't think people do that. I think that that's a huge problem, is that you have to be a leader who has self-awareness.
Hell yeah, man. That's awesome. All right. I don't think we could end off any more perfectly than that. Dude, thank you so much. For
No
your
problem.
time. This
Thank
was an
you. I
incredible
loved it.
conversation.
It's great.
Awesome. All right. Everyone, we'll see you in the outro. And Spencer, drop the beat.
One step